Rumble. Okay. Let's go ahead and do it.
Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy. What are we, Tuesday? Tuesday, guys. Welcome. Sorry, it's been a crazy week. I'm starting to forget my days. But welcome to Sabs Podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabs Podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. And welcome back, guys. I know it's been a minute. I wasn't live on Sunday like I usually am, but I had to take a little bit of a break there. But I am back now. Dr. Shiva will be joining us. Before he joins, I do want to go ahead and show you the thumbnail so you know what we'll be discussing tonight. Pretty interesting stories to cover tonight, considering everything that happened over the weekend. So tonight we are discussing. So of course, Dr. Shiva will be joining us. He's running for president for 2024 as an independent. We're also going to discuss Bernie Sanders pushes back on Cornel West. A huge story, obviously, that kicked up a lot of nerve and energy over the weekend. We're also going to discuss Ron DeSantis is blamed. So things are not looking good for Ron DeSantis. I don't know if you've been following the story that happened in Jacksonville, Florida. There's also a hurricane about to hit Florida as we speak at this moment. So there's a lot going on there. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to cover the United Auto Workers strike, which would be huge. You're going to get the opportunity to hear from the president of the UAW himself. So he's going to explain exactly why they are choosing to try to go on strike. And I think this is a really big story. I know I said that UPS strike would be a huge one. This would also be huge. There's a lot of people that are members of the UAW. So I think that you don't want to miss that. Don't want to miss that story. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. Also want to go ahead and give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, there's Sabsters. Don't forget about Sabbies. And of course, there's also the members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen here on the ticker. And I want to give a huge shout out here to a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Reed Williams. Thank you so much. Truly appreciate you, Reed, and all the other peeps. Let me just go ahead and close that out. But yeah, guys, we got so much to talk about tonight. I'll go ahead and give shout outs to people in the chat while we wait for Dr. Shiva. Let me just check on him really quick because I think he tried to join. I don't know if there was a okay. All right. Quick shout outs to people in the chat. Actually, could I play that clip from Rome? There's a clip from Rome that actually I think Rome just posted that I think is very relevant to what we're going to discuss tonight. And I think people need to hear this. And I didn't have this as one of my original clips to show because I just saw this like right before I went live. And I was like, oh, this is a really good clip here from Rome. So I do want to go ahead and share this. And I think that I think you're going to like what Rome has to say. Again, I think it's very relevant to the stories that we're going to cover tonight. And Rome titled this, "The Left is Holding You Back." Now, for those who are not aware, Rome is one of the members of Revolutionary Blackout Network, the network that I'm a part of. And Rome really he just cuts right through the BS. He tells it like it is. So Rome said the left is holding you back. Listen to this.
Since Bernie Sanders is back in the hot seat, I thought I'd take this time to remind you guys, the Progressive Caucus, DSA, all of these left-leaning groups who carry his water and his message might just be holding you back. And of course, I'm not talking to all of you because a lot of you aren't leaders, a lot of you are just bodies. I'm talking to the people with ambition, people who want to actually control things in their community and I'm talking to you. You might just be getting held back. Of course, I work for Bernie Sanders. If you know me, I worked for Bernie Sanders before. I have done work for DSA. But every time I spoke up in those movements, I got shut down. Every time I wanted to go here, they went there. And when I broke off, I did so much better. I fed people at a faster pace than my whole DSA chapter can do in a week. I help way more people at a faster pace, teach way more people at a faster pace, all on my own. And when I got my team, we just went for the stars. Look at RBN now. If I was still messing with Bernie Sanders and DSA, do you think I would have the library?
That's something to think about. Rome has been working on a library in Detroit, Michigan, and that's something I really want you guys to think about. We'll hold it right there. We'll come back to this. I do see Dr. Shiva is here. Dr. Shiva, whenever you're ready, if you just give me a thumbs up, I'll go ahead and bring you in. Oh, let me make sure you can hear me. If you can hear me, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, he said 1 second. That's something I want you guys to think about, what Rome just said. If he was still, entrenched in the Bernie Sanders movement, if he was still entrenched in like DSA, would he be building a library in his community right now? It's something I want you to think about. Is it possible that these organizations could be just holding us back? And I want you to really think about that. We'll finish the end of that clip later, but that's something I want you to take home with you. All right, here we go. So let me go ahead and introduce Dr. Shiva. Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, he is the inventor of email. He holds 4 degrees from MIT and is a Fulbright scholar. He's a world-renowned systems scientist, engineer, inventor, entrepreneur, and activist. His life has been service, fighting injustice, solving tough problems, identifying the root cause while leading and mobilizing others to deliver real solutions. He now wants to serve America as its president beyond left and right, to educate its citizens to deliver solutions across healthcare, environment, education, innovation, government, and the economy. More importantly, Dr. Shiva is one of us, not one of them, neither a lawyer, nor lobbyist, nor politician. Everyone, please give a huge welcome to Dr. Shiva. Hello, how are you?
How you doing?
I am doing great.
Oh, good. I'm glad we were able to connect, and thank you for the opportunity to reach your audience. It's an honor.
Thank you so much for coming on. So I hear that I think you and I share stomping grounds here, given that both of us have worked at MIT.
Oh, I didn't know that. Where'd you work? Which department?
Engineering and physics.
Oh, really? With who?
Yeah. I worked in engineering, the Department of Materials and Science, and also chemical engineering. So I worked for both of those departments at the same time.
Yeah.
And then I worked in the Physics Academic Services office.
Yeah. So course 3, course 8, and then course 10, if I remember those numbers right. Yeah.
Yeah. For people who don't know, different departments at MIT are listed by number. So that's an MIT thing. For people wondering, like, what?
Course 3 is material science. Course 10 is chemical engineering. Course 8 is physics.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So, Dr. Shiva, I remember a while back you challenged Elizabeth Warren when she was running for re-election for the U.S. Senate. And I particularly remember during the debate that Elizabeth Warren had with Jeff Deal, which I believe he went on to run for governor as well. I remember there were protesters at that debate and they said, let Shiva debate. Could you explain to everyone, number one, why did you choose to run for Senate and why did they prevent you from being on the debate stage?
Right. So let's start with the first question. You know, should I call you Sabrina or Sabby? What's the right way to address you?
You can call me Sabrina. Yeah.
So Sabrina, let me give you the background. You know, I never believed in electoral politics ever. And we'll talk about that because, you know, but I've always been a ground activist. I always believe in building bottoms up movements. When I first came to MIT in 1981, you know, my good friends, because of my background, were essentially poor white working people, the Hispanics at MIT and blacks, very few of them at that time. So a good friend of mine, Arnold Contreras, who passed away, another who was the head of the Hispanic Students Club called La Lucha. Sam Austin went up to become a preacher, who was head of the Black Students Union, and myself, you know, I had run for office for the MIT Students Body president. And at that time, you may remember in the early 80s, there was a guy called Jesse Jackson running. Okay. He was sort of the Bernie, you know, the Bernie Sanders shill of the time. But we didn't know this at the time. So I learned a very early lesson. In 1984, if people go look at it, a guy called Ronald Reagan was running as a Republican. And a guy called Walter Mondale was running as a Democrat. And there was this other guy, Jesse Jackson, who was presenting himself as anti-establishment. Okay. And he was creating what's called this rainbow movement. And, you know, Jesse was speaking all the rhetoric, right? You know, we're going to fight the establishment, da, 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 da. Anyway, so we were all excited, right? We were all, you know, young idealist kids who came from working class backgrounds, had, you know, suffered injustice. And, you know, people like Arnold, MIT let in very few Hispanics, and they wanted minorities to fail because they wanted to set forward the thing. See, these people are dumb. They can't make it. See, they can't fail. Forgetting that the inner cities never put in the infrastructure, which was what the original goal of the civil rights movement was, right? Which was, you know, essentially hijacked by the Kennedys and Martin Luther King. And we can talk more about that, right? People like Malcolm X were actually made invisible. But anyway, none of that, you know, I understood that at that point. So, but what Jesse Jackson ended up doing was he had all these people thinking he was building a movement. And at the last minute on the floor of the Democratic Convention, he gives all of his votes to Walter Mondale, you know, talking this nonsense about the lesser of two evils, and gives a speech. And I heard through the grapevine that he was given a private plane for that. That was a deal that was made, right? Jesse would get, you know, was paid off. But anyway, what me and all my activist friends realized was that you have the wings, the shoulders of the establishment, in this case, Reagan on the right and Mondale on the left, right? But the establishment cannot fly without its wings yapping stuff once in a while, right? To keep the masses entertained. So Jesse, and at that time, people like the Democratic Socialists of America or ACORN, were the wing of the left, right? Saying enough stuff to keep people excited. So, but, you know, they would even attack Mondale, but at the last minute, they corral all these people like sheep back into the one wing. The Tea Party was the equivalent on the right, right? So anyway, so I never wanted to vote because I realized these guys are all scumbags, but I believe my study of history showed it was always bottoms up movements on the ground, you know, passing out flyers, you know? So after that, we ended up developing our own 2-page flyer leaflet, and we challenged the entire, you know, the school newspaper. We became more popular with our 2-page flyer than the school newspaper, which was funded by, you know, the administration. And we would attack everyone, right? But we were always beyond left and right, et cetera. So anyway, I never believed in these electoral processes. You can look at my whole history, and we'll talk more about that. But in 2016, 2016, I had just, 2007, I'd finished my PhD in a great field called systems biology, course 20, which MIT created in 2003. Went back to India on a Fulbright because I was very interested in ancient systems of medicine. And for 2 years, I made some very interesting discoveries. Came back, started a new company called Cytosolve, where we had created a technology to eliminate animal testing, and was teaching a course at MIT in traditional medicines and systems biology. So that's around 2010, 11. Then my stuff went into the Smithsonian for the invention of email, which I never talked about, created all this hoopla because I wasn't the kind of guy that they expected would create email in Newark, New Jersey. And I had to go through this entire vicious, frankly, was driven by racism, because the facts are so obvious that I invented email before I came to MIT. The issue was they wanted to put forward this nonsense that a white dude who was part of the military industrial academic establishment had created it. So anyway, I started seeing what I called a caste system in the United States. I grew up in India, which had a caste system, a Brahmanical caste system of a few people thinking they knew better. And here I was noticing this caste system in the United States, the fact that a 14-year-old kid in Newark could not invent email and the facts were black and white. And that's when I saw Elizabeth Warren running. And here's a woman who knows anything about everyday working people, minorities, and she had claimed that she was Native American. Now, it had nothing to do with even her race, but the fundamental issue is she had used race, which was really designed for actual racism, for her advancement. And so I decided to run against her. But we knew, Sabrina, that we had to create a movement, right? Because it was always about creating a movement. It wasn't about, okay, I'm going to run and, it would be illusion to think that you're going to beat this Democrat machine. But we thought the Republicans would embrace me. I mean, am I not what the Republicans talk about? Pulling yourself up from your bootstraps, bottoms up. But they promoted this fool, Jeff Deal. Yep. So I don't know if I can curse here, but he's a complete fucking moron. Okay. He can barely talk. And instead of embracing me, they promoted him and sort of made me an outcast. So we decided to run as independents. And if you look at that time, you couldn't get out of Massachusetts without seeing a sign. Maybe, John, you could bring one of them here, which said, only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian. In fact, we had a bus, which, I have my building here in Cambridge, which said only the real Indian can defeat the fake. And we had this huge banner on the bus. I get a letter from the city of Cambridge saying, oh, you must remove that banner from the bus. It's violating building codes. It's not on my building, it's on my bus. So anyway, I take them to federal court on my own. We sue them and they drop the case. Okay, so we win that. But the reality was, here's a woman who frankly knows nothing about the real injustices that take place to people of color. And she was assuming this and got all of the accolades or whatever, even her entrance into Harvard out of that. So that slogan became very interesting because we would hand out flyers at, Whole Foods, the Whole Foods over in Fresh Pond, right? Yep. Which typically the people who go there all look like Elizabeth Warren. And we would hand out a flyer, a card which said, or we would collect signatures, right? We had to collect, by the way, 20,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And this will lead to the issue with what occurred with the debate. Now, so I'm running as an independent. This doofus Deal, dirty Deal, we called him, is running as a Republican, and Elizabeth Warren as Democrat. Now, in order for an independent to get on the ballot, you need to collect 20,000 signatures individually of people that want to nominate you. And we actually went and collected those signatures. By the way, we never saw Jeff Deal or Elizabeth Warren's people ever collecting signatures. So I'm convinced they have a backroom sweatshop. They just forge signatures. This is my conclusion. Because we never saw them ever out there, Sabrina. We were out there every day. And we collected close to 30,000 signatures, right? Because we knew they would try to keep us off the ballot. Anyway, but what was interesting was when people would go into Whole Foods, we would park our bus at the other end of the parking lot. So, as you're walking and you wouldn't see it. So these people would see this dark face. Oh, yeah, of course I want a dark man running for office. So they'd happily sign, being the good liberals that they were. And then when they came out, they would see the bus with this "only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian." They'd say, "Wait a minute," right? And they'd call me a racist. Fascinating. So a white person who looks like Elizabeth Warren, who had just signed my signature thinking I was a good, darky that they can support, when they came out, they saw me putting this politically, quote unquote, incorrect slogan, and they would say, "Oh, we want the signature off the ballot." It's just hilarious, right? Sometimes police came. It was freaking hilarious, right? And they would call me a racist. I said, "I'm a racist." I said, "You're the one who's a racist." They go, "What do you mean? I'm not a racist." I say, "Yeah, you are, because she used race to make her advancements." Do you understand that's real racism? Exploiting race for your own financial and personal advancement. That's racism. That's the real racism, what they do. And when you fight for the racism that occurs to you, the right wing puts that down. You see, so the right wing denies that there's racism, and the left wing uses a pale version of racism. You see, so unless you've been through this, you don't understand this nuance, right? So anyway, we got on the ballot. Now, by law, I'm supposed to be on the debate stage.
Right.
But these people are so freaking afraid of putting someone like me on, Democrats and Republicans. Both the Republican and the Democrat Party colluded to make sure I wouldn't get on the debate stage. So when we went to that debate, I had to do a protest in front of WBZ, right? And I did a sit-in, and then my dad actually did a sit-in in Elizabeth Warren, my 83-year-old dad. I mean, this was absolutely freaking illegal what they did. But Democrats and Republicans colluded to keep me off the debate stage. I then filed a lawsuit. We went and got a lawyer. Now, it's called viewpoint discrimination. Remember, UMass is a public government-owned institution. A private institution could decide to keep me off, but a public institution can't, because it's violation of the First Amendment of viewpoint. My own lawyer, it turned out that he was a big Paul Ryan supporter, and he actually threw my lawsuit. We should have won it. So we always dealt with all this nonsense because we were independent, and the Republicans or Democrats always see, "Oh, he's independent. Why should we support him?" But anyway, we learned a big lesson because, the lesson was that these people do not like independent movements, right? Because they always want you in their box. So that was the Elizabeth Warren. I mean, there's a picture of me. I went to a event out in the Berkshires where Elizabeth Warren was doing an event with Whoopi Goldberg, right? So all the people going in were all these, your earthy, crunchy granola white people, right? Across the road, we were holding up a sign called, "Stop Racist Warren." And they're like, "What are you calling her a racist?" Like, it doesn't compute why we're calling her racist, but it's, to me, it's obvious she's a racist. So as I'm saying, I said, "Look, if you guys want to know about racism, why don't you come over here and I'll lecture you about what is real racism." So one old white guy with a t-shirt that says liberal comes over and he hits me. It's a very powerful thing. I have my megaphone and he's hitting me the megaphone represents speech. He's hitting me and saying, "She's not a racist." She goes, "I have a son-in-law who's black." That was his definition. So he gets brought in by the cops, right? The cops, and then Elizabeth Warren invites him back into the VIP seats. So the contradictions here are quite extraordinary, right? I'm the guy who's actually comes bottoms up, we got all of our signatures. We did everything by meritocracy, and both parties made sure we wouldn't get on the debate stage, right? They knew I would have knocked their socks off. So anyway, the next year, 2020, that's the answer to your question. I keep going, but that was what happened, So our supporters, we went and got to the next debate that was taking place. We went and got there were, I think the room held 100 debate seats, audience. We went at 5 a.m. and our people packed it, and we got all the tickets. Legitimately, we got the tickets, and they did not allow us even our audience to go into the debate room. Some people got in, and that's what you saw people saying, "Let Dr. Shiva debate," and then the cops took them out. But this is how entrenched both parties are. They do not want independent people coming bottoms up. They do not want to give them any exposure or limelight. And when you look at a place like Massachusetts, 5.5 million, and this is very similar to other states. 5.5 million people are eligible to vote. Out of that 5.5 million, only 4.2 million register to vote, which means 1.3 million people don't even bother. They don't even believe in the system. Out of that 4.2 million people registered vote, only half of them vote, 2.1 million. And out of that 2.1 million people, 10% are Republicans, which means 210,000 people. 30% are Democrats, which means 600,000 people. And the remaining are independents.
Yep.
So if you split that in half, which means less than 1 million people out of a total of 5 million people are determining who gets power, right? So this is how things are happening. And in our election, we brought out a lot of dark matter. We're the ones who forced the idiot to take the DNA test. I sent her a DNA test kit. She returned it. We had a lot of fun with that, right? It wasn't Trump. I did that. Trump then tried to take credit for it. In 2020, Sabrina, we decided to run. We said, okay, we'll run as Republicans because we didn't need to go to the state convention that year. We had to collect, again, 20,000 signatures. And if you remember, in 2020 was when COVID was taking place. We actually collected all 25,000 signatures because our people went on the ground, collected them. And this time, the Republicans, again, hate me. They decide to run a guy. The only thing they had was a guy with the last name O'Connor. That's all they had. That was their weapon. This isn't a primary. We had 3,000 volunteers. You couldn't leave Massachusetts without seeing these big signs. Dr. Shiva, we'd raised $2 million, $1, $5 donations. We were everywhere. 25,000 lawn signs, 10,000 bumper stickers. And this other guy didn't have anything. And I never believed, by the way, Sabrina, in election fraud. Some people said, Dr. Shiva, the only way you're going to lose this primary is if they cheat you. I said, that doesn't occur. It was like the back of my mind, but not real. And on September 1st, 2020, the results come in, and I win in Franklin County, where it's all hand-counted paper ballots by 10 points. And in every other place, it was 60-40, 60-40, 60-40, 60-40, 60-40. And that was September 1st. And then the next 7 days, I couldn't believe it. I started learning everything I could about how the election systems in this country worked. And I found out 50 years ago, a Democrat majority had passed a rule called 52 USC 20701, which supported audits of elections because they knew, minorities were getting screwed, and they wanted to make sure you could audit an election. And so a Democrat majority were very supportive of audits. And one of those rules in 52 USC 20701 is that for a federal election, all records must be preserved for 22 months. Okay? All records. Now, you remember, except for Franklin County, all the other counties use these machines. When you put a paper ballot like this into a machine, it gets scanned.
Yep.
The machine takes a picture of it. It's called a ballot image. That ballot image is what is stored on the hard disk. And the ballot image is what is analyzed by the AI on the machine to say, oh, 1 vote for Sabrina, 1 vote for Dr. Shiva, right, et cetera. Now, by law, those ballot images have to be saved because that's a record that's created in connection with the federal election. So I had found out in a manual of the Diebold voting manual that there is a feature that they put into these voting machines called a weighted race feature. What is this feature? It's a feature that's in the voting machine. So if you got 1,000 votes, Sabrina, let's say you and I are running against each other, and I got 1,000 votes, the feature allows to weight your race. You get 2 votes for every vote you got. I get 0.5 votes, half of the vote for every vote I got. So it's not 1 person, 1 vote, which is a very famous ruling, right? For equality, with the whole gerrymandering stuff that took place many years ago. So that means you would get 2,000 votes and I'd get 500 votes. And that feature was put into the voting machines because many of these voting machines are sold to stock, companies who do corporate stock votes, right? So you may have, or for condominium associations, you may own a 2,000 square foot apartment. I may own a 1,000 square foot apartment. So if we're voting on something for maintenance, you get 2 votes to my 1 vote. That makes sense, right? Because you have more square footage. But those features were left in voting machines. So I used my mathematics background and I did a statistical analysis and I showed there's no way that this voting pattern could have occurred. So I went to the Secretary of State. You may know this woman, Michelle Tassinari, who is the general counsel to the guy who's called the Prince of Darkness, right? Bill Galvin. William Galvin was the Secretary of State. And I said, look, I want those ballot images. And I gave them my FOIA, which is a public records request. I went with a video camera, and they're gloating behind the window. They're saying, oh, we don't save those images. We deleted them. We don't have to even preserve them. So anyway, I officially give my letter. I said, you have 10 days to answer this public records request. 10 business days goes by, and they never answer it. So I write an email saying, you're violating law if you don't respond to it right now. And that was September 24th. Now, you got to understand, we had moved our campaign, you remember, Sabrina, to a write-in campaign. We didn't get it, right? So we're still bona fide U.S. Senate federal candidates running, and our volunteers distributed about 2 million of these cards. I don't have them. Yeah, they were these kind of cards, okay? They were like this. 2 million of these cards we distributed everywhere. 2 million cards, which said stop election fraud, Dr. Shiva for Senate, write-in. And so I'm still running. I'm on Twitter, which is the platform for politics, right? And I have, I would do a tweet and I'd get 30,000 retweets. That's how much traction I had. My followers were real. So when I tweet out, I said, Massachusetts deleted ballot images. Because in the communications I have with the Secretary of State, I said, where are the ballot images? We don't have to send them to you. I said, show me the law. She doesn't write back the law. She gives me something else. I said, you violated federal law. Those 4 emails, and I do a tweet, never been thrown off Twitter. I said, Massachusetts violated federal law, deleted over 1 million ballot images, which they had done. They're admitting that. Well, I get thrown off Twitter within 24 hours.
Yeah, I remember that, because I know that Twitter has been, especially back during that time, they were heavily targeting people who would make even that type of statement. And the same thing with Jill Stein. Jill Stein used to get a lot of traction on Twitter, and then it was like a couple years ago they started to suppress her as well. But I remember this happening. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what you have to understand is, but I was saying a factual statement. Ballot images were deleted. So when I get thrown off, they have these fake fact-checking companies, which the social media companies hire to validate. Oh, we threw them off because, and that fake fact-checking company says ballots were never deleted. I never said ballots. I said ballot images. And then they said, Dr. Shiva was thrown off when we contacted the Secretary of State. So and this was in Reuters, I believe. And they said the Secretary of State told us the government, that's what the Secretary of State is, had contacted Twitter to silence Dr. Shiva. So think about what I'm saying. It wasn't Twitter did this on their own. The government,
right?
First time in history, the government contacts a social media company to silence a political candidate who was criticizing government. This is a foundation of the First Amendment. Political speech is the most protected form. We're supposed to be able to say stuff against the kings, against this government, right? That's why we have the First Amendment. So I knew I had a First Amendment lawsuit. I couldn't find any lawyers, Sabrina. All these guys are pussies, okay? Because they all want to be friendly with the government so they get their deals. So I had to file the lawsuit on my own. I'm never in federal court. So I filed a lawsuit, saying this is a First Amendment violation. Now, that's a lawsuit. Now, something even harder to get in front of the court is something called a preliminary injunction, which is a preliminary injunction. Acronym is called a PI, where you're telling the court, hey, Your Honor, not only do I have a First Amendment case, but I need you to act on this now, because this is now September 25th, right? I'm still running. Like, I need to be back on Twitter. That's how I raise money. That's how I get the word out. I'm off the most important platform. Well, the judge decides to accept our hearing, which is unheard of. Judges do not like PI hearings, because if they accept a PI hearing, they're doing it because they believe you have a meritorious lawsuit. That's the only reason. So I go into court, I think in mid-October, October 10th. I inform this fool, Fucker Carlson, who claims, the right-wing guy who talks a big game, friends with Hunter Biden, right? Hunter Biden wrote his son his recommendation letter. So they're all part of the swarm. And I thought, wow, this guy should be involved. He claims he's a First Amendment guy, right? Nothing. Okay. no call. And I've talked to him before. And then I go into court by myself facing 3 Harvard lawyers from the Secretary of State. And the judge had me, I have to address a very important thing called the Blum test, which is something I guess people learn in law school. And I hadn't learned it, but I had done the homework and I had written a pretty good brief. And the judge had me argue that. The Blum test is to show that this was state action, that Twitter didn't do it on its own. It was compelled by government to do it, right? And that's a violation of the... Twitter could throw me off because they have First Amendment rights too. But I argued that successfully, and the judge was quite impressed. The Attorney General, who's a Harvard-trained lawyer from the Secretary of State, Adam Hornstein, he thought this case was done. He didn't even bother preparing for it. So the judge reams him out. He goes, this guy's not even a lawyer, and you're not even prepared. You know, what kind of lawyer are you? That kind of thing. And people can go read the transcripts. Anyway, so that takes place. So I proved the theoretical framework that I had a lawsuit, and then we start cross-examining the social media director of the Secretary of State's office because we wanted to find out how I was thrown off. This is critical. So the judge says, so what happened? She goes, oh, we saw him putting out these tweets saying ballots were being deleted. And then, which was not true. I said ballot images, right? She left out the word images. And the judge says, what did you do? She goes, well, we were very upset. So what did you do? Oh, we contacted Twitter. And he goes, oh, how did you do that? Oh, we have a portal. And he goes, what do you mean? Right. A portal? He goes, we have a VIP portal, a special portal for government has exclusive access to Twitter. Now, violation of, First Amendment. It's like red flag, you know?
Well, can we come back to that? Because I actually have, that leads us into the Twitter files. But I have a quick question. I want to get into like your campaign really quick. Sure. I noticed like your campaign video, there was something that you pointed out, and I showed this to my audience, and I think people need to pay close attention to this. I want to show this really quick. This part here, when you mentioned the establishment and the people who we thought were not a part of the establishment, but they still simped for it. I just want to play this little part right here.
I never wanted to run for political office. All that changed when I saw working Americans as never before being duped by the establishment and the not so obvious establishment. Across left and right, we were being sold out and made to forget why we came to America and why America existed. Lawyers.
So it's this part here, this part when you said we were sold out by the establishment. And you showed, let me silence it really quick. You showed Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. And I think this is the part that I tried to stress to my audience. I said, notice it's not just Hillary and Trump. You also called out Bernie Sanders. And I want to hear from you. Why did you consider Bernie Sanders to be the establishment?
Great question. Okay. Sabrina, I'm so glad we're doing this. Okay. Because this is the heart of why there has been so much suffering in the United States and the world. And the heart of that, I'll put up this diagram, which you may have seen. See that diagram there? You know what that diagram is? That diagram, that red line, is a life expectancy rate of U.S. people over the last 70 years. You see how the red line is going downward? Mm-hmm. And the other is the other industrialized nations. If you use this as one performance indicator, and remember, this is from 1970. Well, you had Jimmy Carter, you had Reagan, you had the Bushes, you had the Clintons, you had the Obamas, you had the Trumps, you have the Bidens, Democrat and Republican. This graph, no one wants to talk about it except me because I understand biology, I understand health. It's something I'm dedicated to. That means a life expectancy, and probably it's worse for minorities, okay, or worse for poor people, is going down like this. It's a parabola going down. That means the policies of all of these characters, the swarm, as I call it, a multi-racial, decentralized, bourgeois group of Brahmins, right? The modern day Brahmins, has been screwing over everyday working people, black, white, everyone, okay? All races. And it's their policies. And it's not any one thing. It's not the vaccine, right? So all these, it's a vaccine. No. It has to do with Obamacare. It has to do with the vaccine. It has to do with poison. It has to do with the fact we have the income inequality puts so much stress on people's lives and relationships. We know the number one reason people live long, number one reason, is because of close family ties. And enough studies show community way beyond food and everything. So I want to point that out. Now, that goes back to 1980. Goes back to what? Jesse Jackson. So what did I learn as a 17-year-old kid? That the establishment, if you have the head of the establishment, it has the two shoulders, Reagan, Mondale, right? Bush's, right? Clinton's, but it has the wings. It created the wings. It was a technology they created. They created the wings to flap. Sometimes Bernie Sanders would say shit against Clinton, right? But he's still their boy. He just says enough. And that's what Democratic Socialists was. They're the social democrats that, the Bolsheviks and the Leninists and the revolutionaries talked about, right? Many, many years ago, if you look at theory, the Democratic Socialists are the flappers or wings who just say enough to keep the masses entertained. Now, that's political theory. See, I learned that as a 17-year-old. And that's why it's very important to study political theory. It's like you have to understand the laws of physics. Like, we study at MIT. Once you understand Newton's laws, then you can go build an airplane. But if you don't understand these laws, you're going to build bogus political movements that are always going to fail. So I understood very clearly that the establishment has the wings. The right wing had the Tea Party. And then they used Ron Paul for a while. Then they brought in fucking Trump. Trump's goal was to fill in that vacuum. So the right he was Bernie Sanders of the right. Okay. Bernie Sanders was a Bernie Sanders of the left, or the Trump of the left. And this is a very important dynamic. And when I studied political history, Sabrina, I realized this occurred around 1950. You see, if you go back to the late 1800s and the early 1900s, there were vibrant, militant, when I mean militant, people scaring the shit out of the establishment, not with guns, bottoms up movements led by women, blacks and whites. In 1920s, there's a picture, I wish I could find it, in Times Square of blacks and whites, massive million protesters. All of that's been wiped out of American history. These powerful bottoms up movements is why Franklin Delano Roosevelt was forced to eliminate child labor, forced to give infrastructure, clean water, right? The 8-hour workday. 8 American workers were shot by the National Guard in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 4 American workers were hanged in Haymarket Square fighting for the 8-hour workday. All of this has been removed from American history. And in commemoration of those workers, throughout the world, it was called International Workers' Day, May Day. May Day originated in commemoration honoring American workers. Everywhere else, May Day is celebrated except here. It's a disgrace. Reagan changed it to Law Day. So the establishment has always wanted to remove the ferocity of the American working class when they rise up, blacks and whites, right? And it was those movements that ensured when GDP grew between 1900 to 1970, which it did grow, every wage group's wages increased. But in 1950, the scumbag on the right called McCarthy branded all of these movements as communists, as though they were being remote controlled from, Russia. They were called, and you can see many, Charlie Chaplin had to leave the United States. Great fighter, great artist too. Branded as anyway, it was one of the most opprobrious time of American history. And so the right wing comes in and they scare all these workers. You will never say workers unite. Well, as though workers unite is owned by Karl Marx. It's existed since the time of Pharaoh, And then the left was taken over by fake misleaders like the Kennedys and the Hoffas, right? So these true bottoms-up organic movements, led many by women, like in Lowell, Massachusetts, etc. By 1970, between 1900 and 1970, over 150 million people took to the streets to strike in really powerful working class movements. But by 1970, they're obliterated. The unions are taken over top down by the quote unquote social democrats, and the right wing takes over, Wall Street and telling people, if you ever build a bottoms up movement, you must be a socialist communist. And that's what we have today. So between 1970 to today, only 2 million working people have struck in maybe 900 strikes. Before that, it was nearly 20,000 strikes. You see the difference? And during 1970 to today, as working people stop building their own movements, what's happened? We have 2 American pies. The wages of the first and second income quartile have dropped. And if you look at the area under that curve, it's $47 trillion. And that basically was a wealth transfer of the working people on the first and second quartile up to the elites. Yeah, there was socialism for the elites. 600 billionaires in the last 3 years, during the pandemic, made $2.3 trillion. So this is what's gone on. But the analysis I've done shows it's because of bottoms-up movements. So the technology the establishment created, Sabrina, was they created the fake misleaders. Bernie Sanders, Mahatma Gandhi in India, Martin Luther King, actually. Malcolm X was truly a man of the people, right? He couldn't be controlled. Martin Luther King was an agent of the Kennedys. If you actually go study it very carefully, he was a Southern Baptist bourgeois guy who had a lot of shit in his closet, so he could be controlled. And what the civil rights movement did was they used him to make sure there was no more bottoms-up movement. All the real things of inner city infrastructure were dropped, and it all became about affirmative action, which was a gain of the civil rights movement, but it wasn't the heart of it, which was to build infrastructure, which we
but they killed Martin Luther King.
Yeah,
after he started talking about universal basic income, reparations, and he wanted to organize the workers. And
Vietnam War, okay? When he started talking about Vietnam War. But they also needed to create a martyr, you say? This is a portion of this, which is hard for people to believe, is the establishment creates the martyrs it wants. So people don't dwell deeper, because Malcolm was coming to a very, very different point in his life. He'd broken from ultra-Black nationalism. The last speech he gave was, I believe there will ultimately be a clash between the oppressed and those who do the oppressing, but it will not be based on the color of the skin. He was moving to workers' movements, and he was executed 2 weeks after that. So they do not want one of us, articulate people who come bottoms up, non-Brahmins like myself. They want us to stay in our lane. I should have ideally become a professor at MIT, right? Paid homage to the Brahmins and become some, elite, running like this douchebag Vivek the snake. That's what they expected of me. But the problem is that I never forgot where I came from. I have deep, deep anger and hatred for these people because they are scumbags. They know what they're doing. They know how to lie to people and cheat and slither. And I've seen it. And I never forgot the working class communities I came from. So the bottom line is that background theory I give you is when you study history, you say, wait a minute. Before, when you built the bottoms up movement, they would just shoot you. Then they realized, shit, we can't do this. We are going to create our heroes, and we will have them mouth the same things that they want to hear, and those people will be like poverty pimps. And that's what Jesse was, right? That's from, you go read Mahatma Gandhi's work in India, 1920s. There was a bottom-up revolutionary movement. They actually wanted to have a good revolution like America had and kick out the British. India had never had that for 300 years of massive abuse. So they fly in this guy Gandhi, who is an absolute racist. He did nothing for the Black or brown people in South Africa. He was trying to help the very wealthy Hindus in the Transvaal region get trading rights. He was a buttoned up lawyer, who loved the British. And so he comes into India because this booming revolution was going to occur. So the British needed him. They put him in this white garb and spectacles, have him say some shit, sound like a spiritual leader, give him a spinning wheel. It's all an act. But he gets promoted. How does he get to walk all around India? And every other bottoms-up leader was executed. So he gets made the hero. And what he does, Sabrina, he transfers power from the British Brahmanical elite to the Indian Brahmins. So the British had put all their brown people in place who bowed down to the British. So in fact, the Indian document of 1947 is not called the Declaration of Independence. It's called the Transfer of Power. Think about what I'm saying. It's called transfer of power. So the elites, they studied this. They've created a technology. They will create their anointed ones, push them and market them on people, give them visibility, whether the person and the person may know it or not know it, right? But they're controlling, it's controlled opposition. So I knew this. So when I saw Sanders run, a very good friend of mine, you may know her, Lori Sesnick. Lori was Bernie's entire New England, captain or something. And, she's a smart woman, Harvard neuroscientist. So she comes to my house. She goes, Shiva, you must support Bernie. He says all the right things you say. I go, Lori, he's going to fuck you over. She goes, what do you mean? I say, mark my words. He will be on the Democratic convention stage. He will hug Hillary and he will say why we should support Hillary. She goes, no way. I've been told by Bernie he will not do that. I go, Lori, you're so fucking naive. I saw this when I was 18 years old. Do you understand? He's part of the establishment. That's his role. That is what he's supposed to. He's their innovation, their technology. She goes, no, no, no. She says, fuck you. And she walks out of my house. Never saw her for 2 years later. Then she calls me years later saying you were absolutely right. So this is why political theory is so important, because if you don't get it wrong, she wasted 2 years of her life. And this has been the recurring process, Sabrina. This is why this curve is like this, because they have scumbag after scumbag after scumbag. They have a whole farm league of Bernie Sanders, AOCs, Donald Trumps, Tulsi Gabbards, Vivek the Snake. They breed these people on the wings, you say, who mimic my words, not the, just enough to capture. And they, by the way, with social media right now, they're watching this video. They're watching what's moving people, and they literally steal our messaging points. Ooh, Dr. Shiva said, shatter the swarm.
Yes.
Use that. Ooh, bottoms up movement, revolution. Let me put that in.
So what would you do differently, Dr. Shiva? Because Bernie Sanders right now, and I'm gonna get into this later tonight, Bernie Sanders is going on to every mainstream media outlet. He was speaking recently in New Hampshire live in front of not necessarily a large crowd anymore, but speaking in front of people, basically trying to encourage people to still continue to support Joe Biden. And he's claiming the economy is great. I think the rest of us know differently that the economy is not doing well. What would you do differently with the economy if you were president? What would you do that Joe Biden is not currently doing?
Yes. So there's two sort of questions in there, right? Why is Bernie Sanders doing this, right? And then what would I do with the economy? Look, Bernie Sanders, we have to remove all these rose-colored glasses. He has a job, just like Thomas Massey has a job, like Rand Paul has a job on the right. These people just talk a good game. They're like the Bernie Sanders of the right. Their job is to split the American people so people are always attached to thinking the establishment is going to do something for them. I hope people understand this. That's his role. He wouldn't exist. If he really was truly anti-establishment, he wouldn't get one visibility on any news station. If any of these freaks get visibility on a news station, that's because they're being supported by the swarm. They need them, okay? So that's a fundamental commandment you need to understand theoretically. So that's why Bernie's out there. The reason he's out there also is they have, all of our social media is watched, and they do sentiment analysis, predictive analytics. They know right now in history that the people of the world, not only in America, because of a lot of the work that I did in 2020 with all humility, exposing Kennedy, exposing Trump, all these things, the not so obvious establishment. I like clipping the wings. That's what we need to attack. The shoulders are easy. We need to clip the wings of this establishment. And so we've been doing that. So people say, wait a minute, Dr. Shiva is the one who did all this in 2020. He's the one who exposed the election systems. He's the one who said fire Fauci. He's the one who exposed the backdoor portal. Why is it fucker Carlson waited 2 years and do this bogus shit called the Twitter files? Okay. Musk ain't fighting for us. So people know in 2020, we reached about 500 million people. So we created a disruption. So now what the establishment is doing, they're saying, fuck, there's going to be a true bottoms up movement. So therefore, they're disrupted. So this is why they have the data in front of them, Sabrina. There's some guy at MIT or Harvard Business School or Tufts or the Kennedy School who said, fuck, we have a major problem, Houston. There's true bottoms up movement. And there's a guy called Dr. Shiva and a Movement for Truth, Freedom, Health that has figured this shit out. And they're going and educating people about Bernie, about Kennedy, about Vivek the Snake, about Trump, that these people are set up to keep you attached. Now, this has never occurred before. Malcolm was almost getting there, okay? Every time these people got there, they got executed. But the problem they have with me, we got our shit out there and we're training lots and lots of people to understand this dynamic. So this is why the left is freaking out. They need Bernie to corral people back into the establishment. Do you understand that he's doing the same thing, but he's doing it earlier because they know the shit's going to get out of hand because people are getting smart. And this is why they're indicting Trump and doing this theater, in my view. Okay. And they're in disruption. Oh shit. Let's find this other brown guy who's a fucking moron Vivek the snake, have him mouth what Dr. Shiva's saying, right? But a complete scumbag, who buys useless drugs, has his mother redo the data, and we'll talk about this, right? Push shit out there, complete scam artist. A pale version of me. So they push out a brown face to get the media attention. So the establishment on the right and the left is freaking out right now because of our movement, in my view, with all humility, because we've been exposing Kennedy. I've had to hit Kennedy hard, another scumbag, complete bullshitter. So now historically, what would happen is if our movement didn't exist, these people would get away, right? Talking a good game, right? And people would say, oh yeah, he said that shit against, he's supporting Zionism. Oh, well, but I guess he had to do that. But we hammer him on that, right? Typically, they get away with all these contradictions, but we're not letting them get away. So therefore, the wings of the establishment now are like curling in much sooner. You have AOC supporting Biden, right? You have Bernie supporting Biden. And you'll see shortly, both wings of the establishment either will rally around DeSantis, okay? Or Trump, right? They're creating the theater, but they're in disruption. The good news is, Sabrina, they're in disruption, which is excellent. And I've heard this.
I was just going to say, this is exactly why a lot of times, like, there's certain things like on this channel that will really take off number wise. But whenever I do the videos about organizing and mutual aid, like out in the community, those videos never take off the way the other ones do. And that's what I said a while back before. YouTube, I believe, is actively not just suppressing independent media, but also suppressing anti-establishment voices and anything that promotes like mutual aid or community organizing. It's like they don't want that message to reach too many people.
Yeah, because you'll see a video I put up. I love going on the ground. Even though I'm a technologist, if you look at after 2 years of being thrown off Twitter for exposing the backdoor portal, Musk puts me back on, but he thought I was going to, bow down to him, be his good slave, right? And when I got back on Twitter in October, I said, hey, Elon, I'll be your CEO. You're looking for one. That got like 20 million views. Oh, very innocuous. But every day after that, Sabrina, I said, are you going to remove the backdoor portal to Twitter? You still have the government backdoor censorship portal. And my views went from 500,000 views per day down to 300,000. And I'm lucky if I get 5,000, right? So that swarm video that you saw, which I explained the whole swarm, got like 40 million views, but not because of me. Other people downloaded and started sharing it. So I'm a serious danger to them because they have said, shit, this guy knows what we're up to and he's educating people. So, I go off, we distributed about, in 30 minutes, we distributed about 1,000 of these down to South Station. And this basically says, look, the lesser of two evils is killing your children. We share the graph. Then we say, what's a swarm? And then we invite people to come to our open house. They can't fuck with us on this, right? And then we tell people, go get a bumper sticker. Why? Because you put this on the back of your car, 100,000 people see it. The future is offline. We're all fucked online. When I say we, the true people want to build movements. They want to glue people into social media. Everyone's online. They're not talking to people. What's really cool is if you go hand out a flyer, people take it. You have a conversation out of 100 people. You have 5 good. It's awesome. You're connecting with people. And they don't want us talking to people. Good old school. They want all of it to be robotized, right? Because then they can control it. So this is what is fundamentally going on. So when you come to the economy, when you realize what's fundamentally happening, because there was no movement, when we had a movement, during the early 1920s, powerful movements, wages of everyone went up. The economy actually grew. When there were no more movements, the establishment made money, but not for everyday people, right? So we have to go, when we peel away the onion layer, what it says is, okay, so how do we improve the economy? We have to build a fucking movement, period. It's not like some, I can talk about Keynesian economics or but we have to build a movement. And that's
you mean an outside movement on the ground?
On the fucking ground, period. That's the only way. Look, I learned this when there's a dean at MIT. I don't know if you remember this. In 1983, there was a black dean by the name of Dean Mary Hope. Mary Hope was fired. She was brought in. You may know in 1968, MIT only had like 2 black students there, or 67. One of them was a woman called Shirley Jackson. And Shirley Jackson was the first Black woman who was getting her PhD. And she was delivering her PhD dissertation to this whole crowd of old white guys. And she threw down her thesis and she said, it's a disgrace that I'm basically the only Black woman here. There's only 2 Black students. Well, the next year, MIT, let in, I think, 10 or 20 Black students. And they knew they were going to fail. And they did it because they came from the inner cities where they didn't have the basic skills. But those students were very bright. They took over the MIT faculty club. And they demanded, they said, you know what? You brought us in here on quote unquote affirmative action. We know we're going to fail. And our school systems didn't have any infrastructure. So we're going to force you to give us infrastructure. So they set up the tutorials, the MIT MITES program, all this stuff so the students could get the infrastructure they didn't get. And so when Reagan came in, they wanted to get rid of all those programs. Dean Hope fought for them and she gets fired. And this was right when the Jesse Jackson thing. So we started a newspaper to protect her from firing, right? And that newspaper went viral. We became more powerful than the student newspaper. The administrators would be scared shitless what I would be distributing. I mean, we would just do it on the front of the MIT thing. We got our own mimeograph machine, black and white. We became so powerful, our little newspaper, the True Revolutionaries, and here's the administration's called the Tech. Remember the Tech? You know what MIT did? They went and funded a not so obvious establishment version of us. They funded like the Bernie Sanders. They funded the Thistle. You see what I'm saying? They knew, wait a minute, the revolutionaries are getting a lot of eyeballs. We have the right wing or the establishment. So they created a newspaper. So I'm telling you, they have this down to a science. And I saw it in front of my own eyes. So what I'm trying to say is that this, they can't screw with because there's more of us than them. So we have to get on the ground. And that's what
I would also add too, in reference to policies like healthcare, for example, even Bernie Sanders, a lot of people don't remember this, but even Bernie Sanders himself said, yes, I would give everybody Medicare for all, but it would not be possible unless we also had the outside movements on the ground. And a lot of people don't remember that, but I remember him saying that. And we see what's happening now, right? Ukraine. I want to move to foreign policy a little bit. And I also want to ask you about the caste system because Shama Sawant actually was pretty powerful in that movement in Seattle as well. Yeah. This war in Ukraine, where do you stand on this position? I can tell you most of the people in this audience are heavily against giving any more aid to Ukraine and are heavily against this conflict.
Right. So I've been speaking about this for many, many years. People can go look at my videos. Look, first of all, the whole thing has to do with U.S. hegemony there. Okay. It has nothing to do with helping the people of Ukraine. The people of Ukraine are being basically used as fodder. If you go back to 2013, Condoleezza Rice gave a very interesting policy talk where she said, we must ensure that Europe starts using the US platform for energy, not be dependent on the Russian energy platform, right? Which means because Europe was very dependent on deals with Russia, and she wanted to suck that away. And I remember she was on the board of one of the big oil giants. Okay, she was on their board. So she's the one who was the architect of all of this, that we must get Europe suckling on America's titty for oil, not on Russia. That was her goal. And starting with that in 2014, if you look in Ukraine, there was a duly elected guy who was pro-Russian, a president. So the U.S., Obama and McCain, under the leadership of Hillary Clinton, did a regime change. They did the Maidan Revolution, and the United States installed a pro-U.S. person who was actually a Nazi in Western Ukraine. Now, if you look at Ukraine and you go to the eastern part of Ukraine, most of the people, the Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine, right, the former Soviet Union, you have to understand these people their fathers fought the Nazis with pots and pans. 2 million Russians died in the Battle of Stalingrad. If anyone should be given credit for winning World War II and fighting Hitler, it's the Russian people. They lost like 20 million lives. So when the U.S. did this, the eastern part of Ukraine are freaking pissed as crazy, okay? And at the same time, U.S. companies Shell and Exxon are drilling there because their goal was they would create, find energy there and build a pipeline through Ukraine to Europe. Now, Putin, and by the way, the people of eastern Ukraine were done with that. They decide to leave Ukraine. Legitimately, they had a referendum. And Putin becomes aware of this, right? Or more importantly, the Russian people probably are pissed off. And you have this development that you have today. But this was all designed by the United States to create this discourse. I mean, to discord. You know, in 1992, George Bush said that we will not move 1 inch east of Germany. And they violated all of that. NATO would, and they essentially violated this. So the goal was, ultimately, in my view, it's not like Putin is a nice guy. He's also an oligarch, right? The U.S. is a bigger bully. But the reality is Russia has close to probably $100 trillion worth of resources, more or equal to Africa. And what the British imperialism did, if you look at the blueprint they did for Africa, they had everyone fighting against each other. They went and randomly drew lines. You know, Africans who never fought against each other suddenly were fighting against each other because Britain knows how to divide and rule. And then using that divide and rule, they took over all the resources. And that's the same grand plan that they have for Russia or that region, you know, to get people fighting. And then the US or British imperialism will come in and swoop in. So in my view, I would get the US out of NATO. There's no reason for us to be in NATO, period, at all. That was a Cold War thing. NATO exists to exist. That's why NATO exists. So they create these things to justify their existence. But and the American people have nothing to gain from this. Ukraine is a money laundering operation, right? So much money going there, we'll find out 20 years from now, is flowing back to Lindsey Graham's pockets and to Democrats' pockets. This goes out and then it comes back in, right? It's a money laundering operation. So the whole thing is nonsensical. It has nothing to do with the working people in the United States have nothing to gain from this war. But again, what's happened, Sabrina, is over the last 50 years, there's no more movements. Where are the vibrant movements? Because if there were, I mean, no one's.
Well, okay, so I do have to say, as someone who's an activist, and I've been at a lot of these rallies, or I've been there covering them, or I've been there like as an activist. One thing I will say is like there were multiple anti-war rallies and protests, and I think for those of us that are activists and we try to heavily promote these things, it's disappointing sometimes when people say there's nothing. But the thing is like, where was all of the promotion for the marches for Medicare for All we had 2 years ago in this country that were in over 50 cities across the country? You know, we couldn't even get, obviously we don't expect mainstream media to talk about it, but we couldn't even get, to your point, the progressives or so-called progressives in Congress to even tweet about it, right? Bernie Sanders wouldn't even mention it.
But you know why, right?
Because they're technically a part of the establishment.
But more importantly, those movements were independent of the left or the right. You see, if any of these movements are organic, they will never give it coverage. But they're committing suicide. So why is it that they try to make me invisible? Because they know, holy shit, if we give this guy coverage, Joe Rogan follows me, but he'll never put me on because he knows the day I go on his show, he's fucked. Because people say, wait a minute, you've been hiding this guy. He's the one who exposed long before Twitter files. And they'll realize Rogan is part of the establishment. You see, the establishment has their anointed leaders, Sabrina. They will never promote truly independent leaders because they don't have control of me. They don't have control of you. They will promote the wings. That's fine. Bernie gets AOC, right? Booby effing Kennedy, right? Donald Trump, Vivek the Snake. I mean, look at the New York Times promotes Vivek every freaking week, right? He's got a bunch of Brahmins in there promoting him. And he
was a Soros fellow. I don't know if you know that.
Not only a Soros fellow, he endorsed this woman called Dina Henderson, who is pro-vaccine mandates, pro-mask mandates, big pharma whore. And he gave her $2,700 in 2016, promoted her Maximus and endorsed her. And I just tweeted about this and she just blocked me. Okay. So, and then, you know, Vivek is like this with the big pharma. And that's why he's a big pharma frontman, just like Trump was. Trump is big pharma royalty. That's what he is. You know, Pfizer's sales were going down like this. You know, being in the field of biological engineering, Pfizer's sales went from $65 billion in 2015 down to $45 billion in 2019. They were tanking. They needed the quote unquote vaccine. And that's why they gave Trump said, oh, I'm against big pharma. Well, you took $1 million for your inauguration and he did the V for them. And then Biden carried it on. It's if you don't forget pro or anti-vax, look at the big elephant in the room. Pfizer's revenue is tanking and then they go up like this. And that's all you need to look at. Now, no one will talk about that except me.
Well, I think part of it is because of the censorship, to be honest. I mean, Jimmy Dore, like, have you been on Jimmy Dore's show?
No, Jimmy Dore won't put me on because he thinks Robert Kennedy's the best thing since sliced bread. And Dore needs to be slapped upside the fucking head.
Well, I don't.
No, seriously. No, because when I exposed Kennedy, well, Jimmy Dore, this is what I'm saying. I am very uncompromising on this. Like, if I'm out here and all the work I've done, these people do not cover me. Either they're jealous or they know, wait a minute, this guy's truly independent, but fucking Jimmy Dore was endorsing Kennedy. Kennedy's not a fighter. He supported lockdowns in the middle of 2020. Everyone should go look.
Jimmy said he's supporting Cornel West.
Well, let's see. He was speaking very, and maybe now he's shifting a little bit because people have been calling him out. But if he's gonna put Cornel on, he should put me on. But he knows a day. Talk to him.
I think he would. I mean, Jimmy's brought on pretty controversial.
Well, let's see, Sabrina. Let's test him. No, test him. No, write to him and test him. Let's test him. So, Jimmy Dore, if you're listening, and if you're not a pussy, put me on. Because don't pussyfoot around. Because I'm a ground activist, and we have created a movement. It's global right now. And I've done everything beyond the call of duty. It was in 2020. I mean, if you go back in 2020, I maybe got 2 hours sleep, 2020 per day. It was like a PhD thesis exposing the election systems. I was fighting in federal court by myself, doing my own briefs and running my company. I mean, the Herculean shit we did in our movement, just to give credit where it's due, was extraordinary. I didn't see Dore one instant supporting us. I mean, we're the ones who exposed the entire censorship infrastructure to the world. 500 million people. None of these guys were out there because either, I keep repeating, they're either jealous or they know that, wait a minute, Shiva's not in the left or the right camp. We can't control him. And that's a fundamental issue, Sabrina. They do not want independent movements. If you and I went out today and we did a really good demonstration, right, on censorship, right, and it wasn't endorsed by the MAGA left or the whatever, the MAGA right, it's not going to be covered, period. And the reality,
I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm a registered independent, and they talk to me. I mean, I think sometimes it could be the approach.
No, I don't think it is. I think they know that we have taken an uncompromising approach. Look, let me tell you who covers us. You. I like truly independent media people. All right? And that's who we go to. We are not going to be dependent on people who've shown over and over again they're sort of wishy-washy. You can't build a movement on these people. You really can't. And that's what history has taught me. You have to build a movement on working people bottoms up who really understand these principles. Otherwise, it's always going to be wishy-washy. You say it'll be the next version of Bernie people follow, the next version of Tulsi Gabbard, the next version. You have to understand the politics. And that's why, when I created this base, I used to teach system science at MIT. And then I realized these systems principles are what the elites learn. And that's what they use to manipulate people for power, profit, control. But without these fundamental principles, people are always going to recur, this guy, that guy, but they're not going to realize that it's they that have to build a movement. It has to be bottoms up. And they have to understand they have to become the leaders. There's no savior coming.
Yeah, I think a lot of my viewers do realize that because a lot of them are disgruntled former Bernie supporters.
But the thing is, the former Bernie supporters, many of them became Trump supporters. Many of the Trump supporters were former Obama supporters. You see, we had a guy in our movement who came to us. He goes, first I was following Bernie, then I jumped Obama, then I jumped into Bernie's bed. I was like a political whore. I was going to then jump into the bed of Tulsi Gabbard. Without theory, people are just going to keep going to these next things.
That's a good point.
That's what I'm trying to say. There is a foundational theory. If you want to build an airplane, you have to understand Bernoulli's principles. If you want to build a movement, you have to understand scientific principles. And that's what I've discovered. No different than Bernoulli or Newton, etc. And it may be hard for people to understand that, but that's what I've uncovered. And that's been my life's journey, Sabrina. And with those principles, you could now create real revolutionaries. But without them, people are going to be going like this, wishy-washy, you know?
Well,
So,
would you be interested in working with someone like Shama Sawant? Because I've talked to Shama multiple times.
I wrote her an email. So let me tell you. So the socialist movement, right? That's, she has an alternative socialist movement that she's doing, right? Now, here's the deal, right? In the 1900s, there were revolutionaries who would have all sorts of discourse, right? So in the 1800s, you had, the Adam Smiths and Karl Marx, and these people were fundamentally classical liberals. They were trying to understand society. And in the early 1900s, you had the anarcho-syndicalists, you had, the Bukharins, you had the Lenins, right? The Rosa Luxemburgs. And these people had really deep theoretical discussions on what does it mean to build a movement. But let me tell you, and I've read all their works, I've read all these people's works, but the problem is they didn't have a scientific theory, because this knowledge of system science, Sabrina, did not really come around until the late 1900s and 1950s. You see, they were basing their stuff on philosophical ideas. So they were sort of getting some of the concepts. Okay, we need to build a bottoms-up movement, but how do you build a movement was always this top-down in nature, even the Leninist models, right? Central committee telling people what to do. But in the 1950s, the work of Ilya Prigogine and others realized that we have something called self-organizing systems. So what I've done, I've had to do the work of sort of the scientist to understand political theory. System and revolution really takes, in some ways, where Lenin left off with state and revolution. Lenin understood some principles, but he didn't have system science. What system science teaches is it cannot be top down. It has to truly be bottoms up self-organizing systems. And so there's a lot that these people can learn from the work I've done. Now, in the 1920s, there used to be discourse, but we haven't had someone do the theoretical work. Now, I've spent a lot of time doing the theoretical work. It's like, imagine being Isaac Newton, who figures out the fundamental laws, right, of motion, or Bernoulli figures out, and that's what I've done for political theory, which integrates it with system science. So that's why I'm so, adamant, uncompromising about this, because it's not like my opinion. It's fundamental engineering system science. So as an MIT guy who studies engineering, what I'm saying is there's fundamental principles of how to build a movement. And we better learn them now, because the elites know it. And
well, I will say, like, Shama is working on a workers movement called Workers Strike Back.
Yep.
She's probably the most popular city councilor in the country. She refused to accept the full salary for city councilor. She has had significant wins in Seattle, including the caste discrimination win that they had a couple of months ago. That was, again, led by her. So she has, when it comes to like record and getting things done, she has been known to get things done. And now she has Workers Strike Back, which their number one goal is to organize all of the Amazon warehouses across the country. So that's why I'm asking, like, would you be interested in working together with someone like her?
I will work with people who want to put the working people first and build these bottoms up movements, period. I do not want to work with people who say one thing like Bernie. Bernie knows how to talk out of both sides of his fucking mouth. Oh yeah, we need to build a movement. But then he just says that just to keep his base entertained, right? So I like the fact, when I looked at what occurred in Seattle, you have these, I'm a low caste worker. I felt those things when I came to this country. The Brahmins treat me differently. When I went to MIT, all the Indian Brahmins would stay the fuck away from me, right? My friends were poor blacks and poor whites and poor Hispanics. None of the Indians at MIT were my friends, because they thought me as a lower caste untouchable. They would ask my last name and they knew right away who I was. Sabrina, you won't find a lot of Indians like me here, especially at MIT in the 1980s. So I have experienced caste discrimination in India. When I was a child going to a friend's home, his mother called me the equivalent of the N-word, gave me water in a different cup. My mom was spit on growing up. So this is not like theory fucking to me. This is real. Okay. So you're looking at someone who's experienced this shit. So I know what Brahmanism is. And now we have a Brahmin. Bernie's a fucking Brahmin. Okay. We have a Brahmanical caste system that's global right now. It's a multiracial Brahmin caste system, way beyond India. And so you ask me, will I work with someone? Yeah. But you know what? We have many victories and we know how to win. It's bottoms up, but you have to have the right political theory. Because if you hit a ball 1 degree off, it's going to go 300 yards off. So we better be clear on our theory. That's why when I tell you, let's get theory right. Because if you don't get the political theory right, the rocket's not going to hit the moon. It's going to go somewhere else. And that is why theory is important combined with the activism. How many times have people done these major demonstrations, right, only to be misled? Because who was leading these demonstrations? Was it truly bottoms up? Or was it a bunch of people in back rooms saying, okay, we're going to have the March on Washington. You give the I Have a Dream speech. Well, Malcolm wasn't there, right? What the fuck's I Have a Dream? What about what's going on now? A lot of people in the audience are saying, what do you mean a dream? What about actual things right now? You see, so the elites are very clever at even taking over movements, Sabrina, and they will control them. Okay, I remember in the whole medical freedom movement, fucking Kennedy and his people, we were building the bottoms up movement that stopped the vax mandate. They were telling people, ooh, don't say that, don't say this, do this, right? They actually come in and control movements. So these people are fucked up. I'll give you another example. MIT had investments in South Africa, right? Apartheid in the 1980s. So we organized, so there were 3 groups. One group is the establishment of students. Oh, it's good we're sending money to the poor blacks. We're helping them, right? Another group of the white liberals. Well, we should work with the administration. Let's not be too raucous. They'll work with us, the typical white liberal elites. Well, we, meaning the bottoms up people, you know what we did? We said, look, it's nice for you white liberals to talk about someone 10,000 miles away, but none of you guys I was living in Dorchester at the time, right? Because I lived off campus. I don't see any of you guys even going to Roxbury, Dorchester. How about this? We interconnect the movement for apartheid in South Africa with organizing the food service workers here. You see, they didn't want to do that because now it's real. It's not being a liberal elite. Oh yeah, I want to help the black people in South Africa. Well, what about freaking black people right here? So when we did that movement, again, 3 trends: the not so obvious establishment, the establishment, and us. So I organized a demonstration that went from BU up Comm Ave across a Mass Ave bridge. And as we're marching, they're saying we shall overcome these namby bullshit things, right? No to apartheid. So we take up a slogan, apartheid in South Africa, burn it to the ground. And everyone loves it. Yeah, it sounds violent, but everyone loved it. Why? Because we were matching the actual shit that was going on in South Africa where people were being beaten and shot to death. So 5,000 people are chanting this very powerful militant slogan. And all these white liberals run around and say, oh, you can't say that. That sounds too violent. Ooh, that's not an authorized slogan. We say, shut the fuck up. You see what they try to do? They try to control the natural anger of people. And that's why we have this fucking curve. Because you have, Jimmy Dore, okay? Jimmy Dore doesn't know my journey. Because if he fucking did, he would have had me on in 2020. So when he puts me on, great. But until then, who I support, Sabrina, are everyday working people. And I will never forget them. And that's who we need to mobilize with their anger, with their cuss words, with their approach, which is not going to fit their diplomacy. Because they want us to be diplomats, talk in their way. I'm not going to do it. And that's what's going to win it. Because you know what? We're going to get more of this shit. Look at the results. And this is what we need to look at. So when people say, oh, why are you cursing? I say, well, you know what? That comes out of me naturally. And don't fucking try to control my language. Because language is thought. And if I feel anger, it comes from my journey. And you haven't walked in my fucking shoes. You haven't had people spit at you. You haven't had people try to steal your invention. You haven't had people, when we exposed the backdoor portal, fucking Tucker Carlson didn't say anything for 2 years. Glenn Greenwald didn't say anything. These are dweebs. They just say enough. They don't do what's right at the right time. In 2020 is when you should have spoken up, not after the fact, trying to promote Elon Musk as a fighter for free speech. I'm sorry, where Elon Musk begins and government ends, nobody knows. Every one of his enterprises, SpaceX, $7 billion from government. Tesla, wholly dependent on government carbon tax subsidies. Twitter, dependent on Section 230. He's a government man. So he's fighting for my free speech? No fucking way.
So, Dr. Shiva, I totally hear, one last thing before we wrap it up. I totally hear where you're coming from on a lot of these issues. One thing I will say, it kind of seems like you're mad at everyone.
No, that if you say that, you're dismissive of the fundamental issues. And that is a wrong thing to do, Sabrina, because you're not giving people the opportunity to get educated. No, you come to our open houses, you will see everyday people. Yesterday, we had a transit guy from California. The people we're organizing are across all different backgrounds who are legitimately angry, but they don't understand the theory. I don't have to support Jimmy Dore to say, you know who I support? Crystal Ellis. You know who I support? John Medlar. You go down the list of people. I support everyday people. People need to start asking the question, not like, oh, who do you support? I ask, what about you? What are you doing?
Yeah, and I totally hear that, but I think the thing is that so all of these people they missed the plot in 2020. Let's just say that they missed the plot.
No, it's not true. That's not true. So you're not giving the great honor to the people who did. 500 million people saw our videos. Okay, we had a lot of people. We did 2,000 people demonstrations here. A lot of people got them, but their names are not Bernie Sanders. Their names are not Donald Trump. Okay, their names are not all these people. So who do I believe? Those people. So
no,
yeah,
I totally get that. I totally get
honor.
that.
We should ask the question, oh, what am I going to do? Am I going to hand out a flyer today? Not like, oh, who are you going to vote for? That's a wrong question. Oh, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? I don't think a lot about these people. Look, on November 16th, 2018, Sabrina, what happened? That was a day that Donald fucking Trump destroyed the First Amendment. It was the day CISA was signed into law. 1791, the First Amendment says Congress shall pass no law to abridge freedom of speech. That's the First Amendment. Congress. Well, on November 16th, 2018, Congress passed a law, which was to destroy free speech. The creation of CISA did that. Every member of Congress unanimously voted for it. Every Senate gave unanimous consent. So when people say, oh, will you work with them? No, I'm not going to work with any of these people. They're all scumbags. But we need to mobilize a movement. That's what we need to do. So I'm very clear on that. So this is really a theoretical question. Because if we look at how fast this curve is moving. And if you are serious about activism and you care about your children, you need a systems overhaul. And it's not going to come from these people. Yeah, so we need to be hypercritical. Yes, booby fucking Kennedy. Yes, fucker Carlson. Yes, call them these names. These people are from above. They do not give a fuck about you. And yes, I will be critical of them. And yes, I don't like 99.9% of them, but I like us. And we need to start honoring us. And I
totally hear you. I do think that people I don't know those other people, but I do think that people like Jimmy and Glenn would actually be willing to hear this message.
Let's see it, because I've written to Glenn. Look, one of my former mentors is a guy called Noam Chomsky. Okay. Chomsky, right? The great Chomsky, right? Glenn Greenwald was his. Glenn will bow at the feet of Chomsky. All right. My point is, Glenn knows about it. He wants to own, like he's the big tech, anti-big tech guy. Our lawsuit was the most historic lawsuit. 500 million. I travel all over the world. Random people come running up to me. Oh my God, Dr. Shiva, thank you so much. We saw what they did. We saw that lawsuit. And these people don't do anything? Why? Because I'm not part of their inner circle. And they are either jealous or they do not want to give the fact that right now, and they also, if you look at their tweets, oh, thank you, Elon Musk. Thank you, Elon Musk. Elon Musk still has a backdoor censorship portal. People need to wake up. These people are part of the intelligence network. You have to really.
I'm not one that's praising Elon Musk. That's for sure. I don't trust
Elon
Musk.
Look at Kennedy. He's praising Elon Musk. Fucker praising him. Glenn Greenwald was praising him. What I'm trying to say is, just because they have some equity doesn't mean they're doing what needs to be done at the right time. Remember, these people aren't activists. They write about shit after the fact. They want to win a Pulitzer Prize. They want to get a movie. They don't want to do shit when it needs to be done. Delayed truth is deadly, Sabrina. In 2020, we have it in front view. Government has a backdoor portal into Twitter. We win the lawsuit. We get the injunction. We find the playbooks. Now you wait 2 years later, after all the damage is done, to do Twitter files, which is a limited hangout smokescreen, plagiarized from our stuff. That's all entertainment. What did you do when the shit was hitting the fan?
These are all good points. I totally hear where I totally hear where you're coming from.
We're talking about someone who is in the trenches fighting. And it's like you're a Marine fighting and you want air cover. They were nowhere there to be found. They're scumbags. And the only thing is they concealed our lawsuit. And the problem is, Sabrina, good people like you and others, this is the education they have to overcome if we're going to really win. They think, oh, well, Glenn is a nice guy. He's done some nice stuff. Jimmy's a nice guy. He's done. Well, where the fuck were you when the shit was hitting the fan? You have to ask that question. It's like the Holocaust is taking place or a building is burned down. Fireman comes. Oh, yeah, I'm here. Yeah, isn't it awful? Well, where were you when the building was burning down? We ran the Fire Fauci campaign. We exposed Fauci. We collected 120,000 signatures. None of these people were there. But you know who was there? Our people, bottoms up people, not these people. So I learned a lesson when I was 18 years old. It is the custodians at MIT, the food service workers, and we really need to honor these people.
Yeah.
And I'm being very serious about this. Jimmy Dore, come on over here. Why don't you honor someone like me who comes from nothing, a low caste fucking non-Brahmin? Fuck, yeah, that's why I'm pissed off at these guys. They talk a good game, but they will not put me on. It's a litmus test. Are you real or not? I can show you the emails to Glenn. It's all up on winbackfreedom.com. They sat on it.
Well, I can reach out to Jimmy.
Do it.
I think he should have a conversation with you. I think it'll be a good conversation.
We've had people say you should reach out. Heather's reached out. I've reached out. Zero. Their silence says everything. You're looking at the real fucking fighter here. I don't need to fucking do this, but I do it because I've never forgotten where I came from, Sabrina. And everything I have, I've earned. And if you look at our movement, we have 500,000 people now in 120 countries. No advertising, bottoms up. So why is it I go to Mexico, random people say, oh my God, Dr. Shiva, I saw what they did with the election fraud, So we have become highly visible. These people make us invisible actively. That is a disgrace.
Well, I feel the same way in reference to in reference to like activism, I feel the same way. Like when we were trying to organize marches and things like that, most of the larger independent media channels would not bring us on to promote actions. Most of them would not. And I've spoken at Assange rallies. I've gone to anti-war rallies. I've covered these things myself. But the one person who would bring us on to promote it was Jimmy. So again, like I can reach out to Jimmy. I think it would be great for both of you to have that discussion.
Yeah, let's do it. But he should follow principle, not like friendships. You say it should be done on principle. You see what I'm saying? Like, wait a minute. Look at this guy's history from 4 years old. My history is not one of my personal integrity. Booby fucking Kennedy says my personal integrity and my public integrity are two different things. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Is this the level that we're teaching people? Like, you can go fuck all sorts of people, screw your wife over, murder people, but outwardly you're going to look great. Like, fuck off. Like, these are the people we're supposed to, as leaders, raise people's standards, give people, hey, you can look at my entire history. You will see me in 2007 when I'm getting my PhD at MIT. I pull out a huge banner, US out of Iraq. Half of the crowd booed me. On the other half, gave me a standing ovation. I was the only lone voice. MIT had a fucking stupid speaker. They should have been talking about that. So my whole life has been doing the right thing at the right time. And I can say that with not any arrogance. And some people, oh, he's speaking arrogant. Like, fuck off. That's what I did. Because I try to get credit for what I do. See, they don't like dark people, especially Indians, speaking like this because they have in their mind, an Indian's supposed to shake his head like this and say what to do, you know? They have this idea in their head. And I break that mold, and that really bothers them, Sabrina, and that's the racism. And I want people to become alert to that. Jimmy should think about his own racism. Is it because I don't speak in the way he wants me to speak? I'm not saying him, but in general. You see, they're typically used to a certain framework of what people are supposed to talk like. You're supposed to stay in your lane. Yeah, I speak aggressively. Yeah, I speak tough because it comes from my heart. But I think we're at a very fundamental point because the people that are coming to our movement in 2023 particularly are, man, they're super amazing people. I'll give you an example. A guy saw the Joe Rogan podcast with Kennedy. And he said, oh my God, I was so amazed with Kennedy. I was going to give him $25,000. And, you know, and then I saw your video exposing Kennedy and Rogan. It just suddenly popped up somewhere. And he said, for 2 days, I had cognitive dissonance because I knew what you were saying was true, but it took me a while to absorb it. Right? Same thing. So we are finding people who are getting over and self-reflecting and getting, see, this is this hump. Wait a minute, he's saying this stuff. I'm not sure if I like the way he said it. Wait a minute, but what he's saying is true.
So one thing I'll say, and I'll end on this, is that have you been I know you mentioned Joe Rogan, I know you mentioned Jimmy. Have you been invited on to Breaking Points?
No, I don't know what that is, but Kim Iverson had me on, you say?
Kim is based. Like, yeah. Just keep it real. Kim is based. She's one of the people that she came on very early on.
Have you noticed my show? It's women. I noticed there's a big difference between women and these white dudes. Say it. You know, 60% of our movement was women because a woman goes through a journey that is not because they have to handle multiple things. They get denigrated in various ways. They're very smart, don't get the credit they deserve. So for some reason, women will connect with me in our movement. They've always been kinder and fair, but not white dudes. Seriously.
Well, I will just say the reason why I asked that question is because
these white dudes in power, like Rogan, but Kim didn't need to do that. But look at her background, right? A mixed race family. She was very much against Zionism. She got it. And when she got me on, she thought she was going to get me on the invention of email and running as a naturalized citizen. I got her over that. And then after that, she said, shit, this guy's for real. And then we connected. So I find a fascinating thing between women who get it, because women are the ones who created the 1920s movement. My mom was a fierce fighter. She came from nothing, Sabrina. Imagine a low caste Indian woman in the 40s getting a degree. Unheard of. There's this wonderful picture of all these Indian Brahmin men and this little dark-skinned Indian woman in the corner.
Well, and I totally get it. The reason why I asked that question is because it is not uncommon, particularly in this space, and speaking from my own experience, it's not uncommon to not be invited on some of these larger shows. Jimmy was the exception. Jimmy brought on me. He brought on like my comrades over at Revolutionary Blackout Network when other people would not bring us on. So he was the exception. But what I'm saying is it's not uncommon in this space for a lot of those larger channels to only bring on the approved, quote unquote, voices or the ones that have been, recommended by a friend. So I don't want you to feel like you're being singled out.
No. Sabrina, you have to understand where I'm at. We have our own infrastructure. I've donated our own data center. We reach people directly. So if these guys want to have on, great. If they don't have, I don't even view them as something we beg to anymore. We're way beyond that after the last 3 years. But what I value are truly independent, small podcasters, small or mid-large, and I want to give my views to them because what's fascinating is, and they're from all different backgrounds. And I find that group of people truly the new independent news network. Because if you look at the Rogans, the Russell Brands, all these people are just part of the new neo-media cabal, right? And these influencers, as get paid money on the back end through agencies, right? So they are in some ways worse than the old legacy media because they can be controlled and consolidated in very powerful ways. The future is offline and the future is truly independent people. So that's where I'm at. So none of these people have ever given me anything, Sabrina. So I don't expect them at the age of 59. They didn't give me anything when I was 4 years old. Why should I? But who's helped me was everyday working people, period. And that's who my, when I created the first email system, the women were my customers. The doctors in that medical school in Newark used to treat them like dirt, but they gave me great ideas. They were my customers. So to me, working people, everyday people are the people who are my heroes, because that's where I come from. And we need to honor them. And the movement must be built on them, not on these other people, because they go with the wind, man. If they get views, they'll do it. If they not, they're too flaky.
I hear you. Well, Dr. Shiva, thank you. Thank you so much. I have a time crunch, but thank you so much for coming on. And everyone, please be sure to visit Dr. Shiva's website too. Eric, can you put the link to that in the chat as well so people can see it?
The two things I just want to say, Kim, is everyone should go to Shiva for President. Everyone works, get a bumper sticker, put it on the back of your car. Those of you who want to be a little more active, right? We've open sources. You can download this flyer, hand it out to as many people as you want, okay? And it'll force you to have a conversation with people. Those are the two things people can do, Sabrina. It's getting on the ground and really starting to honor and value your neighbors, the people who work for a living, and build those connections, And anyone out there who wants to do, are independent, truly independent podcasters, I want to support that. But thanks, Sabrina. You're awesome. I'm glad we had this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Be well.
All right, guys. I'm going to go to some of the super chats here, and then we'll go ahead and dive into the next story. Thank you so much for the super chat, Roger. Sab, I'm amped. You know why? We'll mention on call-in. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Dana. $50. Thank you. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, NRJ. Dr. Shiva is a true firebrand. Sabby, has he collabed with Shama Sawant in regards to worker movement? So I did ask him about that. Both of them on each coast could bring a real proletariat coalition against this rotten establishment and get with Cornel West campaign in the Green Party. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. I would like to hear Dr. Shiva's opinion on Operation Paperclip. If he researches this topic, a lot of his questions will be answered. I can send that to him. Thank you so much. JB's in the chat says, I said this exact same thing. This is why Bernie is doing the corporate media tour now. We're going to get into that story. Thank you for the super sticker, Tinafe. Thank you, Roger, who's been a member for 4 months. Dr. Shiva is the perfect person to push Massachusetts CBI amendments. Thank you for that. Thank you, Solomon. Sabrina, I like Dr. Shiva. Very good information. Thank you. Thank you, Meteor Dreams. Sabby, to be fair, Jimmy only spoke against the V after he was V injured. Before that, he was fear-mongering about it and wiping down his groceries. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Wired TARDIS. What does Dr. Shiva think of the potential of expanding the USPS into an ISP to reinforce free speech and small businesses? I can send that to him. That's a really good question. I wish I would have caught that one. And thank you for the super sticker, Nicholas. Thank you all so much. We're moving on to this story here about Ron DeSantis. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to what has happened in Jacksonville, Florida, but this also involves DeSantis, of course. There was a shooter in Jacksonville. It's considered a hate crime. Shooter apparently opened fire at a Dollar General. Ron DeSantis has kind of been put in the hot seat. Some people are blaming him, not necessarily for the shooting per se, but because of his rhetoric, they feel actually made the shooter feel empowered to do what he did. But what do you think? And there's also something else that we're going to mention tonight in reference to Ron DeSantis's campaign. There's a lot happening in Florida right now. Let's get started with the story in Jacksonville.
We turn now to the racially motivated shooting in Jacksonville, Florida. A 21-year-old white man accused of killing 3 with an AR-15 style rifle. ABC's Alex Perche in Jacksonville tonight.
Tonight, new details in that racially motivated shooting at a Dollar General that left 3 black people dead.
We have discovered new facts regarding the shooter's movements and whereabouts hours and minutes before he committed his acts of senseless violence at Dollar General.
Late today, law enforcement sharing this video they say shows the suspect, 21-year-old Ryan Christopher Palmetter, first entering a Family Dollar store about a mile away.
Not only did the shooter park at the Family Dollar, he also went inside the store and bought some items.
He then stopped at Edward Waters University, a historically black university down the street. This video being used in the investigation showing the suspect donning a tactical vest and blue latex gloves, students flagging down a security guard.
What's going through your mind?
That there's something wrong. I was not able to see a weapon at that time. However, I did see what appeared to be a tactical vest, a mask, along with a hat covering his head at that time.
Authorities say the suspect hopped a curve and fled, driving to this Dollar General store where he began an 11-minute rampage. Surveillance video shows the shooter, without warning, firing 11 rounds into 52-year-old Angela Michelle Carr's Kia, killing her. He then...
I just want to remind everyone, this is in broad daylight. This is where we're at now in this country. In broad daylight, this happened.
Walks into the store armed with a handgun and an AR-15 style rifle that authorities say he bought legally. The suspect shooting 19-year-old employee AJ Laguerre Jr., multiple witnesses fleeing out the back of the store, and then later, 29-year-old Gerald Gallion enters. The shooter killing him, missing his girlfriend. And 10 minutes into this heinous act, he sends a text.
The suspect texts his father and says, "Use a screwdriver to get into my room." The father enters the room and finds a last will and testament of the suspect along with a suicide note on his laptop.
ABC News obtaining this distress 911 call his father made to police.
He left in his car a couple of hours ago.
His father stating that his son had been suicidal before and was receiving psychiatric help, but had stopped taking medication.
So I just want to pause right there for a second. Why does it seem like a lot of times the mass shooters tend to live with the parents, but the parents tend to just seem to be aloof? Is that something that you guys have ever noticed? I remember that in reference to Columbine, Sandy Hook, now this particular situation in Jacksonville. Why does it seem like I don't know. I'm not a parent. But one thing that is troubling what he said here is that he did have a mental illness. He was prescribed medication for his illness, but he had stopped taking the medication. So the parent knew that. And to me, that's a red flag. Just something I tend to notice.
All right. And does your son go anywhere that you know of? Is there like common places he goes to?
No, he doesn't go anywhere.
By that time, the rampage was already over, the shooter taking his own life as officers arrived on the scene. Investigators finding writings on the gunman, which they say contained racist and hateful ideology, as well as painted swastikas on one of the firearms.
Plainly put, this shooting was racially motivated and he hated black people.
The FBI opening domestic terror and federal hate crime investigations, saying there's also evidence that the suspect harbored anti-LGBTQ+ and anti-Semitic grievances. The latest federal data shows a 12% increase in hate crime incidents. At a vigil Sunday, Governor Ron DeSantis, who signed laws to restrict how race is taught in Florida public schools, was booed.
We're going to pause here for just a second because I have another clip I'm going to show you too, but something that I just want to jump in and say, this is really interesting considering the fact that it was recently that Ron DeSantis said that they don't have these crime issues in Florida. When he was questioned about crime, you know, he's running for president, obviously, he said, we don't have this issue in Florida because we've implemented all these different rules and yada, yada. We have it under control. And then this happened. And one thing I did notice, the look on Ron DeSantis's face, it was not a proud look. It almost looked somewhat ashamed because of what has happened. Because now this is the thing, like I've watched him for the past couple of months point to other states and say, or other cities as well, and say, oh my God, crime is crazy in California. Crime is crazy over there in Georgia. We don't have these issues in Florida. Yes, this can happen anywhere. Anywhere. Let's continue. He was booed.
The governor condemning the shooting.
We are not going to let people be targeted based on their race.
President Biden asked about the shooting just before meeting with Dr. King's family members and other civil rights leaders at the White House.
We can't let hate prevail.
Tonight, family members of the victims praying that their loved ones spark change.
I hope that this really does spark something for people to take a stand.
David, tonight the Sheriff's Department says the shooter worked at a Dollar Tree from October of 2021 to July of 2022, and he had no prior criminal history. David?
Thinking of those families tonight. Alex Brachet, thank you.
Okay, so Ron DeSantis has not been well received. At least initially, he was not well received by the residents, obviously. I want to go ahead and show you part of that speech that he started to give here, where even one of the city councilors actually stepped forward to say something as well. You know, sometimes there is this bit of humility. Sometimes you do have to have a little bit of humility, and you do have to take a step back, because I'm just going to go ahead and say this. A lot of the rhetoric that Ron DeSantis has had in reference to woke this, wokey, woke that, all of that message that he has continued to say, although I know they didn't talk about that during the GOP debates, but he continued for a while to preach that anti-woke like rhetoric and message to people. And then there was the issue with CRT in the schools in Florida. And so the message that was sent across was obviously that we want to have a message and a standard in the state of Florida where everyone is kind of, you know, just there. Like, we don't really want to focus on race. We don't really want to focus on gender, all those kinds of things. The problem is the way that it was said, some of the things that were said, and the way people took it, it made people feel, particularly Black people, I can't speak for all the other groups, but it made particularly Black people feel as though he's really trying to erase who we are as a people. And so this is why they're booing Ron DeSantis after the shooting happening. No, did Ron DeSantis take the gun and put it in the shooter's hand? No, he did not. But what they're arguing is that now you have to come down to a Black community and you have to stand in front of all these Black people. And what are you going to say? The number of times that you've said that, no, race is not an issue. We're not going to focus on people's race. But sometimes you have to. And this is what people have to really get. Sometimes you have to. In this particular situation, for Ron DeSantis as the governor, yes, this was a hate crime. Yes, this was racially motivated. You cannot just sit there and pretend like race had nothing to do with it. Guess what, folks? Sometimes people are just racist. Sometimes race does have something to do with it. But when you have this message and you have this perception that you can just be colorblind, which people aren't colorblind, by the way, and just pretend that race is not an issue, then what do you do when you have a racial issue happen? So watch this.
We're going to ask the governor if he would come now and bring remarks.
Well, thank you for doing this. I want to just say to the councilwoman, I got you. Don't worry about it. We've already been looking to identify funds to be able to help, one, make sure there's adequate security for Edward Waters College. We are not going to allow these institutions to be targeted by people.
You see this? So you got to remember the college that he went to, that was a historically Black college. So it's just, what do you do? This is one of those moments where you can't say to those kids at that campus, we're not going to focus on race. We're not going to talk about, you can't do that now. You can't do it. Now you have to talk about it. And this is why you can't tell people or continue to preach this message. We don't really need to focus on it. We don't really need to think about that. No, it is an issue. It is an issue. Let's continue. So you see, he was interrupted. They were booing him in the background.
Okay, listen, y'all. Let me tell you, we finna put parties aside. Because it ain't about parties today. A bullet don't know a party. So don't get me started. Okay, Jacoby is nice, but Ann is not. Now, if the governor wanted to come here and he bringing gifts to my community, y'all know I'm taking the gifts because we've been through enough already, and I don't want to go through no more. Now, y'all just be quiet just a minute and let the governor say what he gonna say, and we gonna get this party started. You hear me? Okay, let's do it.
So we have already identified funds from the state of Florida. I've been in touch with Dr. Faison. We're going to be announcing some stuff tomorrow morning, which I think will help not only with security, but also an attempt to help these families. The fact of the matter is, you had a major league scumbag come from Clay County up here, and what he did is totally unacceptable in the state of Florida. We are not going to let people be targeted based on their race. We are going to stand up and we are going to do what we need to do to make sure that evil does not triumph in the state of Florida. And that means we are going to work with Edward Waters so that they have whatever security they need. In Florida, we've already given a lot of money to Jewish day schools because they've been targeted with anti-Semitism. Well, let me tell you this. You are not going to target HBCUs in the state of Florida and get away with it. We're going to hold you accountable. We're not going to let it happen. And we thank what everybody's done, TK, the mayor, and just know that the state of Florida stands with the community. Help is on the way. God bless you all.
You see, he had to acknowledge that what was done was racist. He had to acknowledge it. How could you not? Had to. This is the complete opposite of the message that he's been sending in Florida. Now, I think it's nice that they want to amp up security. If they want to put more security around that college campus, I think that's cool. That's great for the students because one of the security guards was like, by the time he saw what happened, it was too late. That's nice, but that don't solve the problem. You have to get to the root cause of the problem. Why would someone feel compelled to do that in the first place? Why would someone feel that it's okay to have that much hatred and let it get to the point where they feel like they can just go eliminate the people that they despise based on the color of their skin? When you gonna solve that problem though, Ron? Because you see, when you make comments and say, we're not gonna make people feel guilty or ashamed because they're white, so we're going to be careful about what we teach in these schools, particularly when it comes to CRT. When you make those statements, Ron DeSantis, you basically were given the okay to white people in your state that you would protect them. You were not giving that street cred or that credence to Black people in your state that you would protect them. You guys see the problem? So people are blaming Ron DeSantis because of the rhetoric that he's had all along. Like, come on, people. It's one thing to say, I disagree with some of the elements of CRT, and here's why. It's another thing to sit up there and say, I'm not going to have white students feel ashamed. And give me a break, Ron. I saw part of Roots when I was in middle school, Ron. And there were a lot of white kids in my class, okay? I saw part in middle school. We watched Brown versus Board of Education. We saw all of it. We saw the black and white video footage, the documentaries of Black people being hosed down during the civil rights movement, of the police sicking dogs on Black people, beating Black people. We saw that in school. And now you want to turn it back. You want to make it so that people don't feel ashamed. They don't feel guilty. So you don't want everybody to see the full side of history. Why say bump that? To the point where you want to gloss over slavery? You want the schools to be okay to teach that just so white people in Florida don't feel guilty. So you can put up as many security officers as you want at that campus. That does not solve the root cause of the problem. You need to ask yourself why there's so much hate in the first damn place. Now, Fox News, of course, they're giving cred here to Ron DeSantis for walking away from the campaign trail, which he's taking a break from the campaign trail, not getting rid of a campaign, but walking away from the presidential campaign trail. And he's doing that so that he can focus on that particular issue that just happened in Jacksonville and the hurricane that's hitting Florida right now. So there's a lot going on. But listen to how they spin this. And this is what I want you to pay attention to. Remember, Fox News is all in for DeSantis. Listen to this.
It was the right thing to do. It was empathetic. He started immediately on what he could do when it came to funds. And that local leader stepped up. And what I noticed, and this is what I think has to be discussed, is that when she said there's no politics today, right? There's no parties. That's when you heard more applause. It was a few voices that were drowning out. And then when people were, told to let's back up a little bit, they appreciated that. What's your take?
That interestingly, both of those examples of leadership sort of represented the level that they represent. So we had the federal level coming in steady and strong like an oak, saying this is the funding that I'm going to give. My deepest condolences. My heart breaks with you. And then the local councilwoman who says, hold on, guys. A bullet knows no party. Let's let this governor speak. Let's let him lead. I really appreciated that level of connection that we saw. And especially when he went on to talk about, when he was addressing his constituents about the impending storm and saying so clearly, so down to earth, you don't need to leave the state. The state, we've got you here. You just need to get to higher ground, and this is what you need. He suspended his campaign to engage and connect with local and state constituents because he, at his heart, is a servant, because he understands he's a steward of the people. And it's such a stark contrast with so many others, including our current commander-in-chief, who at all times I feel is reading a script or doing what he's told to do, and the actual connection is non-existent.
Oh, it's called doing your job. As governor, that is his job. When there is a tragedy, if there is a mass shooting, there's a big storm that's coming up, as governor of that state, it's part of your job to go and tend to the people of your state. It's just interesting to me how they tried to spin this on Fox News and make it seem like Ron DeSantis is some type of a saint. But remember, the reason why I wanted to play this clip is because I wanted to remind you where Fox News is going. Remember, it was reported after Tucker Carlson was removed from Fox News, it was reported that Rupert Murdoch had already decided that Fox News was going to go for Ron DeSantis this time around, not Donald Trump, because the donors want Ron DeSantis. And typically, this is how it works. Typically, the candidate that has the most money, they're typically the ones that become the nominee. That's usually how it works. I don't know if that's going to work this time, though, because Trump is still way ahead of Ron DeSantis in the polls, and the GOP does not have super delegates like the Democratic Party. But I wanted to point this out to you because, again, look at how it's titled. DeSantis speaks in Jacksonville despite hecklers. You see this? They make it seem like he's doing some great feat. He's doing his job. As a governor, that is what you are supposed to do. But they're going to try to find ways to praise him as much as possible because that's who they're trying to sell to you as the GOP nominee. The media decides who they want as the candidate, just like the corporations. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you. Oh, okay, maybe not. I'll take this comment here. Nicholas says, more focused on his own struggle than solutions for us. Thank you so much for that, Nicholas. Aaron says, because most parents of teenagers are aloof to who their kids really are. That's a good point. Sam says, I just saw Dr. Shiva is followed by Joe Rogan on Twitter. Maybe he shouldn't try to dismiss everyone so quickly. It's a good point. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, Rockfin. I'll go ahead and take that, and then we'll go to the next story. Thank you. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. In 2018, Massachusetts passed automatic voter registration law. What this law does is take high schoolers who turn 18 and register to vote under the independent column. Massachusetts is an open primary state. Let's couple with the latest numbers since 2022. Out of 4 million registered voters in Massachusetts, 1.4 million is registered as Dems at 29.65%. And 436,379 registered GOP at 9.02%, but registered independent trumps both with 2.9 million at 60.1%. Okay, I'm totally lost. Okay, thank you. I saw run some indie candidates to run for state lawmaker office enough. We'll get the 25% needed to approve a CBI amendment, who will be down with making the process of getting an initiative amendment on the ballot easier. Like I've been saying all along since call-in, the leaders are not those on your electronic display screen, but they are in the mirror. So, yep, he got it. And thank you for this. This guy's put Black history and CRT in the same category. I always ask the question, well, if this is going to be the law, then I could simply say, well, my Black child is suffering from an inferiority complex for the fact that they are not teaching Black history and everything is from a white perspective. Therefore, it hurts my child's confidence and they feel bad. Does he know that there's this thing called the internet? Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Delthea says, good show tonight. Thank you, Delthea. We're moving on to our next story here. We're looking at a possible strike that could be really significant, and that is the United Auto Workers Union. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with them, but I definitely am. And I want to tell you that if the UAW goes on strike, this is going to be huge. I want to give a shout out here to Case Study QB for this clip. Let's go ahead and dive in as they discuss this on Fox Business.
Members of the United Auto Workers Union overwhelmingly voting to strike against the big three Detroit automakers if they can't agree on contracts when they expire in 3 weeks.
Edward Lawrence joins us live from the White House with more on this. Edward.
Yeah, Guy Dagan, 97% of the UAW auto workers voted to strike if one is needed. And this could affect Stellantis, GM, Ford, all their abilities to make cars. Now, the union president says that the people were just concerned and fed up with living paycheck to paycheck. Inflation under President Biden has gone up about 16% since the day he took office. Food at home is up about 20% in that time.
You guys see this? 15.8% all goods inflation, 19.7% food at home. Again, they're living paycheck to paycheck. These are the auto workers. It's happening all across this country.
Now, when it comes to the union, the acting labor secretary told me this month the administration is monitoring the situation.
The president believes in, as I do, the collective bargaining process. And we've seen it work. We've seen it work in very high-profile situations. Right? UPS and Teamsters announced a tentative agreement. So we trust that process, and we know the parties are still talking.
About 2 hours ago, President Biden said that the big three automakers should add jobs and increase wages.
Obviously, I'm concerned. I think that there should be a circumstance where the jobs that are being displaced, good jobs, they should go to the first choice, should go to the UAW member that has the job, and the salary should be commensurate.
Now, former Chrysler CEO Bob Nardelli worries how a strike at this moment would hurt the economy. He also worries that a deal could push inflation.
Their workers are trying to make a living. You certainly could understand the environment that's out there today. UPS settled at 40%. The head of the Teamsters said it was unbelievable, legendary settlement of what they're going to get. Now, that settlement is going to basically inflate inflation.
So the current
Listen to what he just said. Now, listen, this is the CEO of Chrysler, former CEO of Chrysler. So this guy is most likely already retired. He got his. You see how people talk when they already got theirs? He got his. He's good to go. He's all set. The other people who are stuck working at these other companies that are part of the UAW, they haven't received theirs. In fact, what they're making in reference to wages is a lot lower than what he would have been making at that point in time. So you have to understand, again, we're looking at the wage difference when we talk about the cost of living as well and the generation gap. When we talk about what people are making, this guy's up there. When we're talking about what people are making in the 70s and the 80s, it's very different compared to what people are making today. And wages have not adjusted for inflation. So it's always easy for people to be like, oh, well, if they increase this just like UPS and they give them what they're asking for, they're going to inflate inflation. So these people are just supposed to go hungry? They're just supposed to continue to struggle? See, it's easy to say that when you already got yours and you got your feet kicked up and you're retired. That's the difference. Something to keep in mind.
Yes. Now that settlement is going to basically inflate inflation.
So the current contract for the UAW, that ends on September 14th. Dagan, Guy?
Edward Lawrence at the White House. Thank you so much.
Okay. Now, I'm going to let you actually hear from the United Auto Workers president. He's going to give you their side of the story, not some guy that just retired from Chrysler or as a retired CEO from Chrysler. Now, this is Sean Fain. Sean is the UAW president. I want you to hear what Sean has to say in reference to the strike authorization for UAW.
Our union family at Altium unionized just back in December to try to combat the dangerous working conditions and the poverty wages that are being paid. So, we just scored a breakthrough agreement over there to immediately raise their wages by 25%. And that's as much as $3 to $4 an hour. So many of them are also going to receive thousands of dollars in back pay over that time frame. And I want to say, this is an interim deal, which means it goes into effect immediately while the workers at Altium continue to bargain for further wage increases as part of a complete first contract with the company. So Altium workers are voting on whether to ratify the interim deal this weekend. This interim wage agreement, it's a much needed lifeline to the workers because they're barely scraping by.
I just want to pause here for a second. Did you guys notice that he mentioned back pay? So sounds like to me, I don't know if that former CEO of Chrysler heard this, but it sounds like to me, there were some back wages that were owed to some of these employees. How did they let it get to that point? Let's continue.
But I want to be clear about one thing. It's still far, far short of what these workers deserve for the level of skill that their labor requires. The working conditions that they have to endure and the incredible value that they produce for this heavily taxpayer subsidized employer. So to Altium and General Motors, I have a simple message. This wage increase is just a start.
That's right. So you guys heard that. This is just the beginning. So that's General Motors. Teddy says wage theft is rampant. Yeah, 100%. So just FYI, there is more to come.
These battery workers deserve the same wage and salary standards that generations of auto workers have fought for, and we're going to settle for nothing less. So UAW family, you might be able to tell today that I'm coming to you from somewhere a little different than my normal environment. So I'm outside of Detroit right now. I'm actually here this morning at the Union Hall of UAW Local 862 in Louisville, Kentucky. And yesterday I had the honor of joining hundreds of our union family who work at Ford's Kentucky truck plant for a practice picket. And today I'm going to be able to walk the line again with our union family who work at Ford's Louisville assembly plant. So earlier this week, I was also able to participate in a rally and a practice picket organized by Local 51 at Stellantis' Mack assembly plant. And I also spoke on Sunday at a massive solidarity rally at Region 1, which was a great day. You know, the rallies we've recently held, Local 51, MAC, and yesterday at Kentucky Truck Plant, and today at Louisville Assembly Plant. And then also the rally we had, the massive rally on Sunday at Region 1. Really proud of the turnout there. Thank everyone for the turnout. So, you know, and that rally at Region 1 Sunday, it was the first regional rally in decades that our union has organized as part of a contract campaign against the Big Three. And these are just a few of the many dozens of actions being organized by locals across the country in the lead up to our contract's expiration. So the cool thing I find in all this, that there are so many locals and members organizing actions that we're not even keeping count of them anymore. I find that incredible. And it's, as I said earlier, it's exactly what I hoped would happen when I was sworn in 5 months ago and announced we'd be launching the biggest contract campaign our union's seen in decades.
So he hasn't even been union president for a year yet, and here we are. So he's not holding back.
And when I made that announcement, you know, it was met with a lot of skepticism in some quarters. But I knew then what we're seeing now, that all of us are fed up with the Big Three's race to the bottom. We're fed up with seeing Big Three profits break the bank while we're breaking our backs. We're fed up with Big Three CEOs getting double-digit pay increases while our pay continues to go backwards.
Once again, this is another example that shows you the CEOs, for the most part, their pay, their wealth, it doubles. It continues to increase, right? But the workers who work beneath the CEOs, they're the ones that are having to struggle to make ends meet. Make it make sense, people. You know, at some point, I wonder when will more Americans stand up and say enough to this top-down system, this top-down structure that we have in this country, enough to the corporate greed. You know, I think a lot of people don't speak up against that because they either benefit from it or they're afraid if they do that they'll lose their job and they'll lose the little bit of income that they already get. So it's like either you're a part of that system and you're benefiting from that type of structure, or you're at the bottom of that system, but you're afraid that if you speak up in reference to it, that may be your job. And then you may not be able to find another job in order to pay your bills, depending on if they're going to give you a good recommendation or not. This is how the employer traps the employee. Just because you decide to leave your job and you decide you want to go work somewhere else, it depends on the terms of how you left. And even then, sometimes I've seen where supervisors have been pissed because you left at a time that they felt was not convenient for them. And so when your future employer asks for a reference and they say, we got to talk to your previous supervisor, and then the previous supervisor doesn't want to give you a reference just to be an ass because they didn't appreciate that you left during the time when you left. It wasn't the right timing for them. And this is honestly why I feel like a lot of people that could stand up don't stand up, because they don't want to be turned over by the system. They don't want to be pushed even further down, and they don't want to put themselves even more at risk to not being able to get a job and to have an income just to even put food on the table. This is the problem with the corrupt system that we have in this country. How many more unions do we need to hear come forward? How many more strikes do we need to see happen? How many have there been in the past 2 years that we've seen? How many more of this needs to happen for the entire country to have a wake-up call and to realize that this system in place is not working? For the majority of Americans, the vast majority of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck. Let him continue.
We're fed up with plant closures, tears, and corporate greed. Recently, one of the Big Three executives dismissed our bargaining demands by saying that we need to focus on reality and that we need to work together. So let's talk about reality. The reality is that the Big Three made a combined $21 billion in profits in just the first 6 months of this year. That's on top of the $250 billion in North American profits they made over the last decade. The reality is the Big Three have closed or spun off 65 plants over the last 20 years. So try telling workers at Belvedere Assembly, Lordstown Assembly, GM's Powertrain in Warren, Ford's Romeo Engine Plant, Trenton Engine Plant, Marysville Axle, Mount Elliott Tool and Die, Toledo Machining Plant. Tell them all how working together has worked out for them.
There you go. If you want to see the rest of that video, it's a longer video, but he has a really good point. It's UAW President Shawn Fain announcing strike authorization vote. That was August 25th this year, and that's on the UAW YouTube channel. So they do have their own channel. You can follow the channel to stay up to date with their progress. But he's 100% correct there. This is something that we need to continue to follow, because if this strike really kicks off, this is going to be huge. That's a lot of employees under the UAW. And let's be real, you know, capitalists like to see these cars continue to flow, right? But now we got another one. I mean, they just reached an agreement, and I thought it was low still. They just reached an agreement in reference to UPS, and here we go. There might be another strike happening. I think this one is going to go through. They got 97% support. Thank you, Anthony says, electric cars are a huge scam. Well, all right, Anthony. I don't know, Anthony. I don't know. I think there's one comment on Rockfin. I'll go ahead and take Eric. Thank you. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin hemp car. Dr. Pepper and Cynthia McKinney said Jesse was FBI since day one. Jesse Jackson, when you have this feeling that the government really is watching you, you know, taps your phone, maybe in your text files. It has a chilling effect. It takes away from your freedom. And often for leaders, none of us are perfect. It neutralizes people. And there's the NPR article there. Thank you so much for that, hemp car. We'll go ahead and move on to the second part of the Tight VNC, Eric. We're moving on to this story about Bernie Sanders and Cornel West. Now, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Bernie Sanders has kind of been on like this press media tour, so to speak, in the last couple of days. Out there being his, you know, the sheepdog to get everybody in line for Joe Biden. But there was a time when he wasn't that way. And I want to take you back to that time. Now, this is from Ryan Knight. Ryan's been killing it. If you guys don't follow him, please follow him on Twitter. He's really good at this. Ryan Knight says Bernie Sanders before he became a sheepdog for Biden and the Democrats. I want to remind you who Bernie Sanders used to be.
Is that the political situation is so controlled by people with big money that working people and poor people have given up on the process.
But what does it take to make the two major parties care?
Well, I don't know, and I don't really care. I'm not part of the two major parties.
But do you see a possibility of a third party in America? Is that really a practical option?
Well, this is an issue that's been debated for about 100 years in the United States of America. And there are those people like myself who do see that that is the future. There are other people who think that one should work within the Democratic Party. My experience in working within the Democratic Party is that it's useless. Not my experience, I haven't, but observing good people who have. Ultimately, I think what you find out on the national level and on the state level is that the people who control the Republican Party are not very different from the people who control the Democratic Party.
What I agree
is that the political...
So there's Bernie Sanders back in the day, basically telling you that he was wanting to move in the direction of a third party, and that if you want to reform the Democratic Party, that's not possible. I like to show those old clips so people can see what has happened to people. That was Bernie Sanders then. Bernie Sanders today is out there shilling for Joe Biden. He endorsed Joe Biden and clapping back against Cornel West, someone who fundamentally agrees with Bernie Sanders when it comes to policy, with the exception of reparations. Bernie doesn't support it. Cornel West does. But fundamentally agrees with Bernie Sanders when it comes to Medicare for all, canceling student loan debt, giving everybody a living wage, and so on and so on. But here's Bernie Sanders clapping back at Cornel West. Now, it started with this article from Politico where it says Sanders hits at Cornel West over criticism of Biden. This is what started the uproar. Now, I'm not going to read the article because we're going to actually show the interview where he makes the statements that the article cites. But how did Bernie Sanders go from that previous video that you just saw where he said that he's moving in the direction of a third party? You cannot reform the Democratic Party because they're both controlled by both the Democratic Party and Republican Party are controlled by corporate interests. How you go from that to criticizing Cornel West over criticism of Joe Biden when Cornel West is running the third party? And there's something else that didn't make sense either. This piece right here. It said, I'm live in New Hampshire to give a major address on why Democrats must ignore the corporate wing of the party and instead put forward a bold agenda that addresses the needs of America's struggling working class. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and say here, let's stop saying corporate wing of the party. The entire party is corporate. It's a corporate party. So what I said here is that Bernie says Democrats must ignore the corporate wing of the party, but he endorsed Biden. Words are just words. Action means more. Let's talk about this for a second. First of all, let's break down corporate wing. The reason why I say let's stop saying corporate wing of the party is because just because you have a couple of people in the party that ran grassroots campaigns doesn't mean that you have two separate wings of the party when the majority of the party is the opposite of those people that ran those grassroots campaigns. It's like if you have a box of Lucky Charms. There's marshmallows in that Lucky Charms box, right? But the majority of the cereal in the box is not the marshmallows. You get where I'm going? So the majority of the party is corporate. The entire party itself is corporate. And just because you have a few people in that ran grassroots campaigns, that is not a separate entity within the party. And they've shown us this when it comes to the way they vote on legislation as well. But what Bernie Sanders is saying here doesn't make any damn sense. He's trying to talk out of both sides of his mouth right now. He's trying to tell people in New Hampshire, which he was there in person to do, to tell people that Democrats have got to ignore the corporate wing of the party. But by the way, when we go back to Cornel West, don't criticize the corporate politician, Joe Biden. See, Bernie trying to be friends on both sides. Bernie trying to be friends with everybody at the same time. And sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you have to take a side. Now, Bernie Sanders is old enough to know this. I'm younger than him. He's been in politics for a long time. I have never been in politics. So I cannot sit back here and believe that Bernie Sanders doesn't know exactly what he is doing. He is talking out of both sides of his mouth so that he can still convince what is left of his base that he's still progressive, and so that he can convince the Democratic Party that he's not going to sell them out. And that's how Bernie Sanders keeps his Senate seat, and they don't try to get Bernie Sanders up out of there. A lot of people are angry with Bernie Sanders. Even Brianna Joy Gray tweeted this. Sanders hits at Cornel West over criticism of Biden. Bree retweeted and said, "This is incoherent. I agree with West." I wish I had on my Make It Make Sense t-shirt. There's a Make It Make Sense t-shirt. I'll show you guys that later another time. But Bernie Sanders had two different interviews. He's on this press tour. He was on CNN with Dana Bash, and he was also on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd. We're going to start with Dana Bash. And I'm going to go ahead and already correct some things that he's going to say at the beginning of this interview. Listen to this.
Republicans battle it out for their party's nomination. Democrats are fighting to hold their coalition together, with polls showing low enthusiasm for a second Biden term. It could be why former Biden challenger and now supporter, Senator Bernie Sanders, took his message to the key early voting state of New Hampshire yesterday, where he laid out what he calls the agenda Americans need. Here's part of his speech.
Democrats, through words and action, must make it clear that they stand with a struggling working class. In my view, if Democrats are prepared to do that, they will win this election and win it comfortably. If not, frankly, I am not sure what the election outcome will be, or for that matter, what the future of our country holds.
So you see what Bernie Sanders is doing, right? Bernie Sanders is their little sheepdog. We're not doing too well in the polls. Bernie, go do that thing that you do and travel across the country and convince people that, you know, you're going to help push Joe Biden left. You're going to help push the party left, even though we know that's not going to happen. But convince the people that we're still going to do those things. We're still fighting for them so they'll come out and vote again. That way we still have what's left of your base to support the Democratic Party. And Bernie Sanders just takes his tail and tucks it between his legs like a good old puppy and goes out and does just that. Let's continue.
Joining me now is Senator Bernie Sanders. Thank you so much for joining me, sir. In your speech yesterday, you urged Democrats to make it clear which side they're on when it comes to the working class. And you said if we're going to defeat the creeping authoritarianism and right-wing extremism, there has to be an ideological change of course. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that, Dana, is that the president has a right to be very proud of many of the accomplishments that we've achieved in the last 3 years. Unemployment very, very low. We've brought inflation down. We're investing in clean energy. We're rebuilding our infrastructure. We have made real progress in a number of areas. But the reality is that today, 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. We have massive levels of income and wealth inequality. 3 people or more wealth in the bottom half of America. Our healthcare system is a total disaster. 85 million people uninsured, underinsured, while the insurance companies make huge profits. The cost of pharmaceutical drugs, prescription drugs, sky high. So the point is, in my view, the president should tout his very good record. We have got to continue to defend women's right to control their own bodies. But we.
So let me interrupt here for just a second. What very good record? If Joe Biden had a very good record, he would be beating Donald Trump in the polls right now by a landslide. What very good record? When 20% of African-American voters said they would support Donald Trump, and you want me to sit here and believe that Joe Biden has a very good record? Let me explain something very clear here. Don't you think it's a little bit odd how the same networks that attacked Bernie Sanders when he ran for president twice in a row, smeared Bernie Sanders twice in a row, have no problem inviting Bernie Sanders back on because he's doing the bidding of the Democratic Party? They're really nice to Bernie Sanders when he comes on now that he's not running any type of progressive campaign. Don't you find that strange? And why is it that you don't see Bernie Sanders on any left independent media outlet? Why isn't Bernie Sanders going on to any left independent media show, giving this same speech that he's been giving since 2016, that he's saying to Dana Bash? Why isn't he on any left independent media show giving that same message? You know why? Because we would call him out. Don't you find that to be a little bit odd? Bernie Sanders traveling across the country, trying to tell people, we got to vote for Joe Biden. You got to keep pushing them, and we'll keep pushing them while we're doing the thing on the inside. But you got to support Joe Biden. Otherwise, we're going to lose our democracy because Donald Trump will win. He's traveling across the country to do that, meeting people face to face, willing to go on CNN, willing to go onto MSNBC and face off with these establishment shills that have State Department talking points. But Bernie Sanders will not go on to left independent media shows who heavily promoted both of his campaigns. Think about it. Let's continue.
You have to deal with the reality of life today. That's what Roosevelt did back in 1936. And that is to understand that we have massive levels of corporate greed in every part of society. Very rich are getting richer. Working people are struggling. We have got to make it clear. We're going to stand with those workers. We're going to have a healthcare system that works for all, lower the cost of prescription drugs, raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And
But you're lying. But Bernie Sanders is lying. Bernie Sanders is sitting here telling people we're going to have a healthcare system that works for all. He knows that is an outright lie. Bernie Sanders knows that Joe Biden is not going to approve any type of Medicare for all universal health care bill if it comes across his desk. So Bernie Sanders is sitting right here gaslighting the American people. He knows those are outright lies. And don't even come at me with maybe he misspoke, maybe he misunderstood. He knows exactly what he's doing.
So I think that was the message of yesterday.
You called it absolutely absurd that Republicans are gaining support, maybe even in some cases have more support for from the working class than Democrats do.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is the message that you gave in your speech that you just said right now not resonating when it's coming from the White House?
Because Joe Biden is not helping the needs of working class people in this country. You know, but according to Bernie Sanders, there's so much that Joe Biden has done that's great. The economy's up and up. Unemployment is, and I'm going to debunk the unemployment thing in just a second. Unemployment is great. Everything's great. But then why is it more people from the working class are willing not to support Joe Biden a second term if everything's so great?
Well, that's a great question. And here's the absurdity. You have a Republican Party that wants to give massive tax breaks to billionaires, a Republican Party that does not want to raise the minimum wage, a Republican Party that opposes legislation that will give workers the right to form unions.
And you have a Democratic Party where you had 7 Democrat senators and 1 independent who also opposed the $15 minimum wage. Bernie will leave that out on purpose. You also had so-called squad members that voted against the railroad workers having the opportunity to go on strike. Bernie will also leave that out. You see, this is why I want to tell you, this is why you not see him on left independent media. See, Dana's not going to push back on that. I would push back on that. And I think a lot of other people in left independent media will push back on that too and say, Bernie Sanders, what the hell are you talking about? Why aren't you calling out some of these Democrat politicians that have voted the exact same way the Republicans have when it comes to the needs for working class people? Because Bernie Sanders is no longer, let me make this very clear. Bernie Sanders is not our ally. He is not our friend. He is not someone that we should support. I don't support him ever since 2020. I told you what he really was and what he was really about. So Bernie Sanders is now an enemy. Bernie Sanders is a part of the establishment. He's a part of the same establishment that he told us to fight against. He is not on our side no more. Bernie Sanders left our team. He left our team when he made it very clear to you that he was not willing to push back on Joe Biden. He left our team when he lied and told you that he cared so much about Medicare for all, but yet he was willing to sit there and endorse a candidate who is against universal health care instead of endorsing the candidates that are for it. If Bernie Sanders cared so much about Medicare for all as he says he does, why is he not trying to organize what's left of his whack-ass base and get them behind the candidates that do support Medicare for all if he cares about it so damn much? Think about that, people. What a joke.
A Republican Party which wants to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And the reason I think they do well among working class people is the Democrats have not been strong enough to oppose that agenda and present a strong alternative agenda. In other words, you can't be pro-labor and pro-worker unless you have the guts to take on these large profitable corporations who are exercising an unprecedented level of corporate greed. The American people have got to know the reason that inflation was high last year was not because primarily of the war in Ukraine or a breakdown in supply chain. It was because of corporate greed in the fossil fuel industry, in the food industry, in the pharmaceutical industry. These guys raised prices like crazy while they made record-breaking profits.
But does Bernie Sanders have the guts to take on the corporations and take on corporate greed as well? Because if he did have the guts to do that, then why is he not doing that right now when it comes to endorsements? If he had the guts to take on corporations and corporate greed, why is he not supporting and backing candidates like a Cornel West, who's not taking corporate money, who's not a part of that system, if he really wants to take on corporate greed? If you're going to take on corporate greed, you don't tell the rest of your base, I'm going out here and endorsing Joe Biden, and we can't get Donald Trump again, so you guys come along with me. You're not really trying to push back on corporations. Bernie not really trying to push back on no corporate greed. Bernie Sanders has gaslighting you. Bernie Sanders has been gaslighting us for years. And it is very frustrating for those of you who gave money to Bernie Sanders, who canvassed for him, who knocked on doors for him. You have every right to be upset. And anyone who comes in and tells you, well, don't say bad things about Bernie, he's the one that woke us up. Did he? Some people were already woken up when they chose not to participate in electoral politics in the first damn place because they were poor and are still poor, and they saw that none of these politicians gave a damn about their community and offered to help them. Was it Bernie that woke people up? Maybe we should stop talking about him like he was some messiah. He just plopped down from the stars, and all of a sudden there he was, 2016, and said, we need to fight back against corporate greed. Was Bernie Sanders the first person to say that? I don't think so. Now we're going to fast forward to this part here when she gets to Cornel West. So let's skadoodle there. Let me see.
Undercut an economic rebound.
Blah, blah, blah.
Close ally of yours. He is running a third-party campaign for president. He recently criticized you for endorsing President Biden's reelection. Listen to what he said.
I love the brother, and you know, you even in love, people have deep disagreements about these things. But I think, again, he's fearful of the neo-fascism of Trump. People look at Biden, they don't really want to tell the full truth. He's created the best economy that we can get. Is this the best that we can get? You're going to tell that lie to the people just for Biden to win?
What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that it certainly is not the best economy that we can create. That was what my speech was about yesterday. We've got to join the rest of the industrialized world, guarantee health care to all. We've got to cut the cost of prescription drugs in half. We've got to raise the minimum wage to at least $17 an hour. We've got to build the affordable housing we desperately need.
But that message was delivered to people in New Hampshire, and the people that Bernie Sanders is speaking to are not in D.C. Why are you going to New Hampshire telling them this is what we got to do? This is what we got to do. What the fuck you telling them for, Bernie? All they do is just go out and vote. Why aren't you saying that to your colleagues in D.C.? Why aren't you saying that to people like the senators from Delaware who voted against the $15 minimum wage? Are you talking to Kirsten Sinema? Are you talking to Joe Manchin? Are you talking to all those shills who actually voted against any type of a living wage for people in this country? Why are you going to tell people this in New Hampshire who have no power in Washington, D.C.?
Where I disagree with my good friend, Cornel West, is I think in these really very difficult times where there is a real question whether democracy is going to remain in the United States of America. You know, Donald Trump is not somebody who believes in democracy, whether we...
The Democratic Party, so let me come here for a second. See, this is Bernie Sanders lying. For him to just say basically, well, my good friend, Cornel, yeah, but I disagree because we got to protect our democracy. Bernie Sanders knows damn well there's no real democracy in this country. Bernie Sanders, who was cheated twice by the same party that he stands up here and continues to bootleg for. You tell me that Bernie's not a part of the problem. You tell me that Bernie is not a part of the same corrupt system and he is doing their bidding, and he's even worse. You know why? Because he's pretending to be grassroots, and that mofo is selling you out to corporations, smiling in your face and stabbing you in the back. That's what he's doing. You want to be stabbed? Think about this, Bernie. They stabbed you in the face, in the front, right at the DNC convention. When you had all the counties in West Virginia and the superdelegates said, and we're going to give it to Hillary Clinton, they stabbed you in your face, in the front, not in the back. And you're going to sit here and tell the American people that we got to save our democracy as if we really got a real one. When they can handpick candidates, when they can tell you to take a step back, when Barack Obama can pick up the damn phone. And I say that with all my chest. Because this is a damn lie. Bernie Sanders was the greatest con that ever happened during my lifetime in the Democratic Party to young people. Greatest con.
Women are going to be able to continue to control their own bodies. Whether we have social justice in America, we end bigotry. Around that, I think we have got to bring the entire progressive community to defeat Trump or whoever the Republican nominee will be, support Biden, but at the same time, which is what I did yesterday, is demand that the Democratic Party, not just Biden, have the guts to take on corporate greed and the massive levels of income and wealth inequality that we see today.
Senator Bernie Sanders, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Sold out for books. How many books has Bernie Sanders written since he ran for president? Twice. We need the progressive community to get together and support Joe Biden, who's not going to give everybody health care. Let's debunk some of the things he said. This is from Ryan Knight. Under Biden, homelessness has increased by 15%. Food insecurity increased by 25%. Suicide rate has hit an all-time high. Rent, gas, and grocery prices are all higher under Biden than Trump. Voting for Democrats made things worse, not better. It is time for a third party. Cornel West 2024. Where's the lie, people? He talked about unemployment, but this dropped. U.S. job openings in July unexpectedly dropped to lowest level since March 2021, and June number was revised down significantly. But according to Bernie, Biden's economy is doing great. He can sit here multiple times and he will not mention, you talk about unemployment, but you'll never hear him mention how Biden kicked all those people off unemployment. You'll never hear him mention that. We're going to go to this clip here that he has with Chuck. Now, this comes from CJ. Welcome to the NATO Left Sheepdog Show. They go on to talk about, are you trying to discourage Cornel West from running? So here he is again, NBC News. So he done been on CNN, NBC News. These are all back to back, by the way. He's in New Hampshire. He was in Boston. He's making the press tour. Bernie, go out there and help Biden. Go help the Democratic Party like you always do and be a good old boy. And that's what he's doing. That's exactly what he's doing. Listen to this.
Just for the president. Is if you want to do well in this election, talk to the needs of the American people, have the guts to take on the big money interests who have so much power.
It sounds like
he knows. See, even this is a lie. Bernie Sanders knows that Joe Biden is not going to take on big money. Bernie Sanders knows majority of the Democratic Party is not going to take on big money. So why are you here on Meet the Press to give this message to Joe Biden? You know the Democratic Party is not going to do this. Again, why? To give you hope, to give you the idea that there's still a chance. So you'll come out and you'll still continue to support the Democratic Party. one of the greatest tools that an organization or a corporation, because the DNC is a corporation, will use is to have someone appear to be on the outside do the work for the organization on the inside. Bernie Sanders is a registered independent. He appears to be on the outside of the Democratic Party, but he's doing the work for the Democratic Party.
You don't think the phrase finish the job is something to rally around? That there needs to be more than that?
Well, yes, you need to recognize that not only have we accomplished a great deal in Biden's first 3 years, and he deserves credit for that, but there are so many long-term problems that this country is facing. Does anybody in America think that our healthcare system is working? And yet the insurance companies make tens of billions of dollars, drug companies make tens of billions of dollars. We don't have enough doctors, nurses, mental health providers, pharmacists, dentists. So we need fundamental reform in healthcare. And by the way,
we need fundamental, you see how he does this? We need fundamental reform in healthcare. We talking about the insurance companies, we're talking about the high costs, but then he's still going to tell you to support the candidate that doesn't agree with any of this and is not going to get it done. Make it make sense. Cornel West supports Medicare for all, Bernie Sanders. Why are you against him then? Why are you against his third party run? Something he had the guts to do that Bernie Sanders never had the guts to do. Think about it, people.
the existential issue of our time is whether or not we address climate change. And we have made some steps forward, but there is no question in my mind if we're going to provide allow our kids and grandchildren to live on a healthy planet, we've got a lot more to do.
Do you think there?
But he wants you to vote for Joe Biden, who's out here approving the Willow Project and approving projects for people to drill off the coast of Texas. But Bernie Sanders here lets you know we got to do a lot more in reference to climate. But support the candidate who's screwing young people over. That's what I want you to do, guys. We're going to go out here and we're going to create this movement and energize a lot of young people. But in the end, when I don't win, and I know I'm not going to win, there's not going to be any movement for you to go back to. I'm just going to tell you to vote for the corporate people that I told you to fight back against. And that's how we continue to keep the young base energized in the Democratic Party, because young voters, for the most part, are falling off. Boomers and older, like silent generation people that are starting to pass away, they can't necessarily continue to count on their vote forever. Millennials, some of us checked out. Gen Z, a lot of people checked out. So what do? They use someone like Bernie Sanders to energize those young people to get them into the Democratic Party. Bernie know they weren't going to let him win. Bernie Sanders told Jesse Ventura from day one, if he loses, he will be supporting Hillary Clinton. I will not be moving towards a third party movement with you. So Bernie Sanders was a con from the get-go, boo. He was a con. And Bernie should be ashamed of himself for taking money from working class people. I stood there with people at Bernie rallies, and I met people from all across the state, but from other states, people who drove far away just to see Bernie Sanders, just to hear him speak. People who gave them the last what they could because they believed that he was going to help them get health care. So for Bernie Sanders to sit back and tell you, I'm going to endorse Joe Biden, and you go out there and vote for Joe Biden because I'm afraid we're going to get Donald Trump, the way he sold out working class people, Bernie Sanders can piss all the way fuck off. Don't send me no more text message, no more emails. I still get text messages and emails from Bernie Sanders campaigns. We're having an event right outside of Boston. We're having an event at the Common. Don't call me, don't text me, don't email me, don't write me, don't reach out to me at all. And I tell everybody else to do the same thing. This is a scam.
There'd be a robust discussion on this on the left if there were a competitive primary. Do you think there should be?
Well, what I think in this particular time, this particular moment in American history, when we're taking on somebody, the former president, who in fact does not believe in democracy, he's an authoritarian, and a very, very dangerous person. I think at this moment there has got to be a unification of progressive people in general all over this country, people who are prepared to make sure that women control their own body, that we deal with climate change, that we represent the needs of the working class of this country and take on the billionaire class.
It doesn't make any sense. You can't take on the billionaire class through corporate interest. You can't take on the billionaire class through the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And Bernie knows that because both of those parties are corporate. So he sit here and he talk to Chuck and he feed people this line of bullshit.
One way that you make it clear that age isn't a factor with you is you're pretty energetic. We see you travel the country. You show up on, you do interviews. It is clearly an issue for many voters when it comes to President Biden. He's a year younger than you. You have advice to him on how he should assuage those concerns in the public about his age?
Look, when people look at a candidate, whether it's Joe Biden or Trump or Bernie Sanders, anybody else, they have to evaluate a whole lot of factors. I met with the president, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks ago. We had a great discussion. He seemed fine to me. But I think at the end of the day, what we have got to ask ourselves is, what do people stand for? Do you believe the women have a right to control their own bodies? Well, the president has been strong on that.
See how he pivoted from answering that question directly? Notice he is not willing to go harsh at Joe Biden.
Do you think that climate change is real? Or do you agree with the Republicans that it's a non-issue? Do you think we should raise the minimum wage? Do you think we should reform and take on the pharmaceutical industry?
Again, he's painting those as as issues that Republicans are against and leaving out the fact that there are Democrats in DC that are against those as well. See, this is the con, guys. This is the con. See, Bernie Sanders wasn't really trying to lead no political revolution. Bernie Sanders was trying to funnel you into the Democratic Party and continue to keep you there, and also use fear mongering about the Republican Party so that you stay there. This is the con. The fact that he can just sit here and leave out and omit information that the American people need to know. And this is on record. The way people voted, it's on record. And he won't even mention it. He won't criticize the Democratic Party. He won't push back on Joe Biden. He'll sit up here and pretend like what Joe Biden is doing is in line with all of those things that he mentioned. And it's not. This is the con.
The age is an issue, Chuck, but there are a lot of broader issues than just that.
Let me ask you about Cornel West. He was a co-chair of your campaign in 2020. He's flirting with a Green Party bid for president. The numbers tell the story between 2016 and 2020. You can directly correlate the two third-party candidates, their collective total. That was the difference between Biden winning states and Clinton losing those key states.
Here they go telling this lie again. Clinton lost those states because she did not campaign in the Rust Belt, and they continue to leave that out. Listen to what Bernie says.
Are you trying to discourage Cornel West from running?
Well, I've known Cornel for many, many years. He's a very independent-minded guy. He will do what he wants to do.
Shouldn't you be an independent mind guy considering you are a registered independent? You guys see this? Let me tell you, this is a mask off moment. When Bernie says he's an independent guy, he does what he wants to do. Bernie letting you know that he's not. He's not really an independent guy. He doesn't really do what he wants to do. He follows Democrat leadership. They'll let him go so far, but in the end, he always ends up right back there. See that?
I just think, again, I think Cornel or anybody else can play an important role now about raising issues that are not always discussed. But at the end of the day, I think the progressive community in general and the American people have got to make a decision as to whether we stand for democracy or authoritarianism, or whether or not we're going to represent working class families. And
the Democratic Party also is authoritarian. part that's hilarious to me. So he got his talking points from Democrat leadership. Bernie, go out on the trail. This is what we want you to tell people. Tell the progressive community that we got to decide to stand for democracy. Now's not the time for a protest vote. Knowing there's no democracy in the Democratic Party. How come you never hear Bernie Sanders talk about the DNC fraud lawsuit? Hell, I've talked about it. Other people have talked about it, but you never hear Bernie Sanders mention that, do you? You never hear Bernie Sanders mention how they actually decided in court, how a judge stated in court that the DNC does not have to be fair to you, that they can choose who they want. You never hear when Bernie Sanders, when they all went to court, I interviewed the lawyers who filed the lawsuit. But you never hear Bernie Sanders mention this, how the DNC is a corporation and they don't owe you a fair election and they can pick who they want. That was decided in court. Never hear him mention it. But he's going to sit here and lie to you and tell you we got to protect democracy.
One of your chief political advisors is concerned that Cornel West is being taken advantage of by maybe people that simply want his name on the ballot. Do you have?
Listen to this, guys. Cornel West is being taken advantage of. Cornel West is a grown man. Let me ask you, Cornel West and Bernie roughly in like the same age group. So you're going to say, oh, dear God, Cornel West, oh, your friend, this poor black man might be being taken advantage of, as if Cornel West isn't smart and intelligent enough to know exactly what he's doing at the time he's doing it. You see how this works? He's been fooled. They're tricked Cornel West.
Those concerns?
I really haven't followed it that closely.
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, he said that because he didn't have nothing else to say. See, he ain't following it that closely. Bernie know what's up. Bernie know what's up. That's his way of trying to keep it out of it. In his mind, Bernie saying, damn, Cornel had the guts to do what I couldn't do. But at the same time, I can't talk about this publicly. I got to stand by the Democratic Party. And I wonder if Bernie Sanders might have been threatened or if his family might have been threatened. I wonder about that. But Cornel West did respond. He was actually on Rising this morning. Listen to what he had to say in reference to Bernie trying to criticize him.
What's your reaction to what Senator Sanders says there?
Oh, no, I think that Brother Bernie's being consistent. You know, he said that all along, and I can understand the argument. I think it's a plausible argument. I just don't think it's a persuasive one. I think that the argument he's making means that there's never any possibility for breaking from the corporate duopoly. There's never any possibility of trying to speak to the needs of poor and working people. I'm fresh from Mississippi, as you all probably know, there in Rankin County with Brother Jenkins and Brother Parker. I was there, the precious mother of Jenkins, Mary, and those lawyers down there, Brother Malik and Brother Trent. They're dealing with issues that the Democratic Party won't touch, which is issues of poverty and intense police brutality. And we haven't even got to the military adventurism abroad. So I think in many ways, Brother Bernie's making a plausible argument, but I think deep down in his heart, he knows that the Democratic Party has no fundamental intention of speaking to the needs of poor people and working people. They are dominated by their corporate wing. They're dominated by the militarists when it comes to foreign policy, and that he and AOC and the others are going to be, in a certain sense, window dressing at worst, and at best, people to appeal to every 4 years. But the Democratic Party is beyond redemption at this point when it comes to seriously speaking to the needs of poor and working people.
The Democratic Party is beyond redemption at this point when it comes to speaking to the needs of the working people. 100%. And Cornel West just told you Bernie Sanders knows. Bernie knows. He's not stupid. People got to stop falling for this game. because I see people on Twitter, man, just come in swoon, just like bees. Let's come in and defend Bernie Sanders when people were upset about him. Some of these people I had to come to a realization. Some of the people that were part of the Bernie movement really did want radical change. And some of those mofos were just Democrats that wanted health care. Let's keep it real. Not all of them were about no revolution or radical change. Some of those mofos were just Democrats that just wanted health care, and that's why they were a part of the Bernie movement. So they had no problem just bending over backwards and just saying, okay, I'll just go with Hillary or I'll just go with Biden. They had no problem. So they can't understand this Cornel West thing. They can't understand Cornel West running, through as third party. They don't get it. They're just like, I can't, what is he doing? Why? They're losing their shit. The DSA types, the Jacobin types, liberals who just want health care. Let's just call it what it is. There's one more piece here I want you to hear.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I do think that there's this argument that's very persuasive to a lot of voters that says, well, yeah, I don't think the Democratic Party is going to do anything more than maintain the status quo. I completely agree with the critique that it's a corporate party. It's why I potentially supported Bernie Sanders in 2016 and or 2020. But Donald Trump does present an existential threat, and therefore I'm going to bend the knee at the end of the day and vote to prevent him from getting a second term of office. And Dr. West, this was a position that you took ultimately in 2020, going ahead and voting for Joe Biden. So can you help us understand why it is that you feel differently now, and how things have changed if they have?
Well, I think we've reached such a low point in the nadir that either we go for broke and try, in fact, to reshape most of the political system. It'd be nice to have rank priority voting and proportional representation. That would be a positive thing. The Democratic Party has no interest in that whatsoever. It's clear that Biden and company have no serious interest in trying to scale back on the militarism abroad. They have no serious interest in trying to really make poor and working people a priority. So that Bernie's argument, and again, I love my brother no matter what, but Bernie's argument is there's never time to break. And part of the paradox here, my sister, is the neo-fascism that's escalating is predicated on the rottenness of a system in which the Democratic Party facilitates that frustration and desperation because it can't present an alternative. And if America is unable to present an alternative to the Democratic parties in the end, then we're going fascist.
100%. So you hear what Dr. West is saying. Bernie basically feels like there's never going to be the right time. It's never going to be the right time to go to create a third party movement or to have any type of political, movement on the ground, which is what Dr. Shiva was talking about earlier. Bernie is never going to agree that it's the right time. So why is everybody sitting around waiting for, well, we just got to give them more time? No, we don't. You think Bernie Sanders was the first person to bring up universal health care? There were presidents. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt. Let me get my Roosevelts right. I think it was Teddy. I think Teddy Roosevelt wanted to do universal health care. This was not new. And so it's just, I showed you the video as to why they won't do it. Right? So think about that. We will continue to be stuck. Now, I got a couple more things that I want to show you. Where are we at? Neoliberal tears. Shout out to neoliberal tears. Because I'm telling you, certain media, they got on board too. They got the calling points. They know what let's just go with the Democratic Party. Neoliberal tears says deranged commentary from Crystal, who says the only thing Dr. Cornel West and his candidacy will accomplish is helping reelect Donald Trump and hurting the left. That sounds just like MSNBC. I thought breaking points was supposed to break points. What points are you breaking if you sound like corporate media? You ain't breaking no damn points. You appearing to look independent on YouTube, But you are still using corporate media talking points and trying to, again, convince people to get stuck in the damn Democratic Party. Listen to this.
Only thing that Cornel West, Dr. West, who I love, admire, respect, whose politics I almost wholly and completely share.
I love, respect, politics, almost wholly, completely share. Have you seen Cornel West on Breaking Points to talk about his campaign? Oh, and don't give me the, oh, well, maybe they haven't had time. No, bullshit. They didn't have Republican candidates on Breaking Points. Cornel West has been on people's channels multiple times, been on RBN multiple times, been on my show multiple times. He's been on Black Power Media multiple times. We're the smaller channels. So if you admire and respect and all this hoopla so much for Dr. West, you had that admiration until he decided to run third party. I ain't seen Dr. West on Breaking Points doing an interview about his campaign. Come on now. You can bring on Vivek. You can bring on RFK Jr. twice. But someone who you love and admire and respect so much, you ain't had him on there yet to talk about his campaign? Give me a break.
I think effectively the only thing that his campaign will accomplish is, number one, helping to reelect Donald Trump, and number two, hurting the left. Because
this talking point from Crystal sounds just like MSNBC. This talking point from Crystal is the exact opposite of what she said when her and Saagar were on Rising. When her and Saagar were on Rising, she actually sound more left then in Rising is corporate than she does now. And they supposed to be independent. What's that about? Would the investors not like that so much? People who invested in Breaking Points, would they not like it so much for you to say Cornel West is doing the right thing by running third party? Because maybe some of those investors have also invested in Democrat politicians. You think I'm joking? I'm not. And look, people got to get their paper. I get it. But if you got investors vesting in Breaking Points the same way that TYT had investor, obviously your talking points might be a little bit slanted. You know what I mean? Don't look at me. I don't have no damn investors.
is ultimately, you know, there's just a poll that came out that showed Biden and Trump basically tied in a head-to-head. You throw Cornel West in and Trump is winning by like 5 points.
No, the poll actually that she's referring to, which we showed on the show the other night, they're not tied in a head-to-head. In the head-to-head, Donald Trump is still beating Joe Biden. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. Here comes Chris. Oh, wait a minute, guys. We can't do this third-party thing because then you're going to get Trump. What the fuck is the point of this show? What's the point of it? It don't make no damn sense. All these people are fucking sellouts. Crystal, Saagar, Kyle, all of them. They all became millionaires. And so they're just like, well, we got to say the right things so we can continue to grow our audience and continue to keep our investors. Screw the poors. You guys aren't going to get working class issues accomplished. You guys aren't going to get Medicare for all, but we'll keep telling you to keep supporting these progressive politicians and continue this movement, which doesn't even fucking exist, so that we can continue to get paid. You can't run that by me. I wasn't born last night. I call it like I see it.
And the margin is just exactly the amount that Dr. West takes away from Joe Biden. Now, listen, it's fully on.
Takes away from Joe Biden. This is such a fucking lie. Like, it's just, how can you trust this, guys? How can you trust this shit?
On Joe Biden that he needs to do more to appeal to potential Cornel West voters, but let's live in the land of reality of how this is going to work out. They're not going to do that. Dr. West will take some percentage, relatively small percentage, away from the Democratic total, and it makes it easier.
Well, then that means that the Democratic Party should have done a better job, Crystal. That means the Democratic Party should have helped working class people and they wouldn't be in that situation. This ain't the first time third party candidates have run. The Green Party runs a candidate every presidential election. Every presidential election, at least since I've been around. Now all of a sudden, third party candidates are a problem.
For Donald Trump to get elected. So if your priority is reelecting a Democrat, and if you believe, as I do, that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are not equivalent, that Joe Biden has been better in particular on economics, but also with things like the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Joe Biden's economics has benefited people like you. Joe Biden's economics has not benefited poor people and working class people. People are still struggling. You think the increasing grocery store prices really hurt and affect people like Crystal? They hurt and affect her. She's a fucking millionaire. Think about this. These are just flat out lies. Her and Sagar, they are completely out of touch. They're not working class. Wow.
Then, yeah, I think a third party effort makes it more likely that Donald Trump gets reelected. And the reason why I say I think it will ultimately also hurt the left wing and left principles, if that's what you care about, is we have
the left wing and left principles, if that's what you care about. Crystal, if you cared about left wing principles, you wouldn't be voting for Joe Biden. If you cared about left wing principles, you would be supporting a Cornel West. You would not be supporting a Joe Biden and telling people that his race is going to make it better for Donald Trump. You don't really care about left-wing principles. You care about Democrat principles. You care about party first, policy second. So you may support some policies, but at the end of the day, you still going back to the Democratic Party, regardless if that person is a progressive running on those policies or not. Even if it's a corporate Democrat running on different policies, you still going back the Democrat candidate. You don't care about left-wing policies and principles. You are a corporate shill sitting there pretending to be independent when you are not independent. Let's continue. Miss me with the bullshit.
The model of 2016. Look, the theory in 2016 with Jill Stein was if we withhold our votes from the Democrats, and that's going to force them to the table, we're going to have a voice in the room, they're going to have to come to our side. No, that's not what they did. Instead, they demonized anyone who would have even considered Jill Stein. They used it to demonize the left. They used it to undercut any sort of leftward push. And
Crystal doesn't want to be demonized. She's afraid they're going to call her names. You see, this is why I tell these people are not fighters. That's why you don't ever see these people out in the street. You don't ever see them in no types of activist movements. These people are not fighters. They don't want to be picked on. They don't want to be demonized. They don't want people to call them names. They don't want to be criticized. They want to sit in a little bubble and just pretend like these things don't exist. That's no different from corporate media.
And so while I would love to imagine that that theory of the case would work out, we've seen the reality, and that is not what happens. Now, the place where I profoundly disagree with Bernie Sanders is on his orientation towards the Democratic primary.
Now, this shows her bias here. The Democratic primary. Now, of course, she's going to disagree with Bernie Sanders in reference to that because she's friends with Marianne, and that's who she pushing. Look at all this disagreement that she had about third party. That's 1 minute, 49 seconds. And this little bit here left for disagreeing with Bernie Sanders.
And there's another section of this where he gets asked specifically about the Democratic primary. And he says, no, I think we need to unify behind Joe Biden because that will be what helps to defeat Donald Trump. Well, that's exactly the argument that was used against Bernie Sanders himself.
Yes.
So this goes to show you the game. This shows you the game. This is just a game. So Crystal, she exposing the whole fucking grift. That's the argument that was used against Bernie Sanders himself. Correct. So what that tell you? This is all a game. The Democrat primary is going to help Donald Trump. These people, she's just a Democrat. That's it. She's just a Democrat. Like I said, some of these mofos that were part of the Bernie movement, they were just Democrats that just wanted everyone to have health care. Let's go back a little bit so you can hear that again.
The argument that was used against Bernie Sanders himself.
Yes.
Both in 2016 and again in 2020.
You guys see how this works, right? See, this is what I was telling you. See, this is all a fucking game. And they'll continue to do this for years, whatever makes them money. Because let's be real, you become a millionaire. It's not like you sitting back saying, oh, I don't want to be these millionaire no more. No, you're going to try to do whatever you can to keep that going. Nick had a good way of
showed Biden Trump basically tied in a head-to-head. You throw Cornel West in, and Trump is winning by like 5 points.
Oh no, she's
and
still talking.
The margin is
stop. I can only take so much of that voice. I'm sorry. So Nick comes in. Listen to Nick.
Bernie Sanders pulled one of the biggest political con jobs of the modern era. Bernie Sanders took hundreds of millions of dollars from ordinary, desperate people and promised a political revolution. Now he's nothing more than an ordinary pro-war Democrat. Bernie Sanders had potential to be a leader of a movement, but instead he reduced himself into being a weaselly, spineless, little PR puppet cuck of the Democratic Party. Now, in light of a surging third-party potential candidacy of Dr. Cornel West, Bernie's old friend, Bernie Sanders is throwing cold water and telling people to support the Democratic Party. According to Bernie Sanders, this is once again the most important election of our lifetime. According to Bernie Sanders, if Trump wins, it will be the end of our democracy. Bernie Sanders sounds no different than the average Morning Joe, Rachel Maddow, MSNBC shitlib at this point. Bernie, did you forget that you ran against Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and they rigged both primaries against you? He now propping up the system that is rigged against us? What a fucking coward. The job of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the squad is to shift what it means to be a socialist to the right and create a weak, ineffective, spineless left-wing movement.
Yep. They're shifting it to the right. Jill Stein hit the nail on the head here. Bernie, you would have won the primaries and the presidency had the DNC not tipped the scales in 2016/2020. If that didn't scare the Dems into ignoring their corporate wing, what makes you think idle words will get through now? This sheepdogging is pathetic. Shout out to Jill. And I just want to remind you, this again is from Ryan Knight. Ryan's been killing it. At the end of the day, the Democratic Party, they just want to be as close to the Republican Party as possible without being called far right extremists. Don't believe me? Here's a little bit of evidence.
That my policies are so mainstream that, you know, if I had said the same policies that I had back in the 1980s, I'd be considered a moderate Republican. I mean, you know, the
Republican Party. We need an opposition that's principled and strong.
One of my prayers is that the Republicans will take back their party. The country needs a strong Republican Party. It's done so much for our country.
And we'll pause it here. They are Republicans. That's all this is. Look, Democrats, Republicans, you can see the overlap. Total support for Israel, do Wall Street's bidding, unlimited military spending, hostility to Russia, Iran, and China, full spectrum dominance, let money rule politics, neoliberalism rocks, spy on everyone, screw the poor and old, oligarchy, not democracy, U.S. imperialism, outlaw third parties, crush the left, regime change is cool, kill the poor. They have more in common than we realize. And that's something I will continue to reiterate. Eric, can we go back to the first panel of the Tight VNC, I want to end on that video of Rome, because I think people, that really sums up everything, to be honest. I want to end with this, and then we'll go through the super chats. Rome has it right on the head. This is why do you guys think you never see people like RBN? You'll never see us like on Breaking Points or anything. They don't want their audience to hear this message. You don't hear them talking about activism and all this shit. Why don't they have Rome on there who's building a library? You won't hear them talking about that because they don't want to mobilize their people to actually organize and do work within the community, because that takes money away from their grift. Listen to this. Rome hit the nail on the head.
Since Bernie Sanders is back in the hot seat, I thought I'd take this time to remind you guys, the Progressive Caucus, DSA, all of these left-leaning groups who carry his water and his message might just be holding you back. And of course, I'm not talking to all of you, because a lot of you aren't leaders, a lot of you are just bodies. I'm talking to the people with ambition, people who want to actually control things in their community and get things done at a faster pace. I'm talking to you. You might just be getting held back. Of course, I worked for Bernie Sanders, if you know me. I worked for Bernie Sanders before. I have done work for DSA. But every time I spoke up in those movements, I got shut down. Every time I wanted to go here, they went there. And when I broke off, I did so much better. I fed people at a faster pace than my whole DSA chapter can do in a week. I helped way more people at a faster pace, teach way more people at a faster pace, all on my own. And when I got my team, we just went for the stars. Look at RBN now. If I was still messing with Bernie Sanders and DSA, do you think I would have the library? Right? Do you think I would have my garden?
Nope.
No. They wouldn't even let me be an open communist.
Nope.
So I feel like if you really want to be, a leader, if you feel like this isn't enough, it probably isn't. It probably isn't. And just because they are the only group that's doing something, don't mean that join them. You know what I'm saying? Because I could have just joined the CPUSA after DSA, which neither one of them is doing what I want to do. None of them have the goals that I want, So what did I do? I broke off and I created my own party.
And another thing I want to add about those organizations, the type of things that Rome and the rest of us at RBN are doing, like mutual aid and Rome's building a library, those organizations like DSA, they don't encourage that type of activity. They just want you to go support politicians. That's something to remember. They don't encourage this kind of stuff. They want to keep you as sheep.
So now I'm open with it. I don't have to go and deliver Bernie message. I'm delivering my own message. I don't have to tiptoe around socialism and communism. I just tell you straight up what it is. And you're gonna love it. And you're gonna love it. But these people are holding us back. And the more we tiptoe around it, the more we will never reach our goal. Because you just tiptoeing. We need to get the sprinting here. You know what I'm saying? But go ahead, do you. I'm just relying on the message. Don't shoot the messenger. Because I'm telling you, I've done way better at a faster pace than my DSA chapter can ever do with my old one. So think about it.
So that's something I want you guys to think about for a second, because I think Rome really hit the nail on the head. And that is the fact that the reality is those organizations are holding us back. When we talk about, Dr. Shiva was talking about a mass movement on the ground. The problem is when these movements get infiltrated, a lot of times they're infiltrated by people who are coming from those other groups, like a DSA or a Jacobin type, or I'm volunteering for AOC's campaign and I want to be a part of your movement. These people are not on the same path as those of us who want to focus more so on the ground and break away from the duopoly. And those people will turn on you when the time comes for them to choose between the duopoly and going outside of the duopoly. And I've seen it happen. So the thing is that you have to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, we have to sit back and ask, who is a barrier to progress? Who is driving our bus? Are we driving our own bus, which we should be, or are we a passenger on our own bus and DSA is driving the bus? Jacobin's driving the bus. Bernie Sanders driving the bus. All these people in so-called left or whatever they are now, independent media that are still trying to keep you in the duopoly. Are they driving your bus or are you driving your bus? Because the thing is this. If somebody else is driving your bus, it's time for you to open the door, kick them off the bus, and you need to get back into the driver's seat. This is how they prevent progress. This is how mass movements don't start, because you have people who are taking control of the narrative and they are constantly trying to water down your message to keep you where you are. They'll say a couple of progressive things here and there, but at the end of the day, they're always going to suppress any type of radical movement that is going to be a hindrance to the duopoly. And people have to understand that. Let's see that poll, Eric. There was a poll. I believe you guys responded. Okay. Why is Bernie against Cornel West running third party? 80% of you said because Dem leadership opposes it. 10% said because he fears a Trump presidency. 5% said not sure. And 3% said he wants to protect democracy. That's 1,000 votes. Thank you guys so much. But the majority say because Dem leadership opposes it. And that's a big part of the problem, considering the fact that Bernie is not even a part of the Democratic Party. Let me get these super chats here. Shout out to a kid, Sabby. Nice to see you on the Hill. Thank you so much. Thank you, Devotion Orange. Thank you, Sabby. Thank you, Word from the Point. Bernie sounds like a Manifest Destiny supporter. Thank you, Devotion. Citizen Journalist of 2023, Sabby. Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you, DG Daniels. Bernie threw surrogates like Tulsi, Nina, Zephyr, BJG, and the rest of his supporters under the bus and backed it up, all to cozy up to Dem establishment. No surprise that he'd do the same to Cornel West. I forgot about Zephyr Teachout. That would be a good person to talk to. Thank you, Delthea. Reform means keep the institution intact, but make it exploitation nicer. Bernie likes reform. There you go. Thank you, Dave. Sabs, this show was fire. I get that Jim Jim's interview with RFK was bad, but Shiva went too far because that whole interview was like the pew emoji. I think Dr. Shiva should sit down with Jimmy. I think that would be an interesting interview. Thank you, Charlie. Sabby's on fire. Hit that like button and happy birthday, Charlie. No, I did not forget. Shout out to Kevin. Just found you recently, Sabby, and I'm a fan. You go, girl. Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'll take the comment on Roger. I mean, on Rockfin, on Roger. Thank you, Roger, for the tips on Rockfin. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. He left our team when he said vote for Hillary and that he's not going to run third party after years of saying we need a third party. If you hung with him after 2016, then you were just in denial. And yes, I'm including myself in that also. Despite the fact I did notice when he became a millionaire, he stopped saying millionaires and billionaires and would just say billionaires and amped up Medicare for all rhetoric. Oh, I didn't realize that. Sabrina, I will tell you the same thing about Bernie that I said about Dennis. That is not Bernie. That is a screw. The real Bernie is locked up in a basement with Dennis having a laser go through his brain as this imposter poses as the real Bernie. We must find the real Bernie and release him. That's interesting. Roger's being funny. I kid, guys. That's a joke, YouTube. So let's examine this for a moment. Crystal and Saga broke away from Rising when they were more independent minded. Go on their own, But how is it that West ends up on rising before breaking points? Thank you. Brianna had the tweet of the day yesterday when she said if Biden doesn't want to lose against Trump, he should drop out. There you go. There you go. All right, guys, I am done and I am way over time. And I do have something else I need to do before I hit the hay. So peace out, guys. I am supposed to go on to Glenn Greenwald's show tomorrow on System Update. So check me out over there. Thursday, I am talking to Imran Khan's friend. Imran Khan was just, his sentence was just suspended. He's going to come on earlier in the day. I'm going to do it as a recording and I'll upload it as a premiere because the time difference in Pakistan, he can't come on in the evening here. And I believe there's someone else coming on too. I have to go through my notes. Anywho, no call in tonight, guys, because I have an appointment in the morning, but we'll do call in Thursday night. But sorry, guys. So save your questions for Thursday. Save your questions for Thursday. All right, guys. If you didn't get a chance to do so, smash that like button. If you're new, don't forget to sub, share, and also smash that like button. And I got to head out. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.